This is Audible.
Phoenix Audio presents Psychic Warrior, Inside the CIA's Stargate Program, the true story of a soldier's espionage and awakening, read by the author David Moorehouse. Author's note: what is the greatest experience you can have? It is the hour of the great contempt, the hour in which your happiness, too, arouses your disgust and even your reasons and virtue. Friedrich Nietzsche. Psychic Warrior is a journey through time and space. It is a private witness of one man's rise, awakening, fall, and rebirth. It is a testimony to life outside the physical dimension, to the gift of remote viewing, to hope for all humanity, and to the reality of those who would preclude you from ever hearing the message. This book tries to explain with some degree of simplicity a very convoluted and intricate story of espionage and spiritual awakening. I have labored carefully, striving in every regard to abstain from any act or reference that might be construed as less than honorable. Right, wrong, unjust, or fair, it is not my intent to pass judgment on my nation or my comrades. I tell this story as I saw it and lived it. You may draw your own conclusions. Even the most seemingly sinister of those in the intelligence community do what they do because of their unfaltering belief in the mission. The mission is to protect our nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic. It is this passion that often drives them beyond the moral and ethical expectations of duty. It is the passion that prompts them to put aside all rationale, answer the call to duty, and quickly turn a former colleague into a hated target. I understand that. You should as well. Out of regard for my former associates in and around the intelligence community, I've chosen fictitious names and, when necessary, disguised their physical characteristics. It is my desire to keep them clear of any unwanted attention. I have used the real names and identities of only 3 former remote viewers, my colleagues Mel Riley and Lynn Buchanan and Joe McMonagle, who preceded me. They are all included in the story, but this is my version of the story, not theirs. Any 3 people witnessing an event will provide an interrogator with 3 different versions of the same event. It is certainly true of descriptions of events spanning years of evolution and interpretation. For the sake of clarity and continuity, several meetings described in this book as a single event, in a single place, actually consisted of multiple meetings, in multiple locations with multiple attendees. There is no intent to deceive by doing this. It is necessitated by space requirements. I beg your indulgence. Chapter 1. The Dawn. I spent my childhood in the Army. I was a young nomad traveling from post to post with my family. I knew nothing of life except what a soldier and a soldier's wife taught me, and I never consciously expected to be anything but a soldier. In high school, I spun from one focus to another, giving little thought to what the future held. I enrolled in a small community college. Eventually, I ran for and was elected president of the student body, which in turn led to a scholarship at a larger university. One thing was clear at this point: we all have a destiny, and one fall day in 1975 I recognized mine high on a mountain overlooking Provo, Utah. Wiping the sweat from my brow, I saw him, an Army colonel, standing there with the sun at his back, talking to a much younger man who was in fatigues as well. In all the confusion a 19-year-old man experiences, seeing this officer was like coming home again. I joined the Army ROTC program the next day. There was, however, one other inevitability. It was the issue of a mate. One of my roommates owed a hometown girl a favor. She had previously arranged a date for him, which had gone well, and now it was his turn to reciprocate. He set me up on a blind date with a woman by the name of Debbie Bosch. Reluctantly, I trudged to her dorm, not knowing what to expect. Standing in front of her dorm room, I sighed and knocked. I shook my head. What the hell was I doing this for? I was half turned away when the door opened. "Hi, I'm Debbie," said a soft voice. "You must be David. Mike told me a lot about you." "Won't you come in? I'd like you to meet my roommates." I couldn't speak. I just nodded like a fool and followed her in. I don't remember much about her roommates. In fact, I don't even recall speaking to them. All I saw was Debbie. I'd never met anyone like her, and from that moment on I followed her like a puppy. Debbie and I were married April 22nd, 1975. Exactly 9 months later, Debbie bore us a beautiful baby boy, whom we named Michael. There we were, sophomores in college, married and parents. The sacrifices had only just begun. Debbie was a wonderful Army wife, even when I was just a cadet. Being a soldier isn't easy, but being a soldier's wife is more difficult still. I was commissioned a second lieutenant of infantry on April 16, 1979, and immediately entered active duty. Because of my successes as a cadet, I was granted a regular Army commission and designated a distinguished military graduate. I won the General George C. Marshall Award, given to the top graduating cadet of the university. I was also chosen by a National Review Board to be the recipient of the National Dr. Ralph D. Mershon Award, which is given to the number one cadet among the 2,500 officers who receive regular Army commissions. I graduated from the Infantry Officer Basic Course at Fort Benning, Georgia in 1979 and was the honor graduate of my class. While we awaited orders to our first duty station, I attended the Army Pathfinder School, again becoming the distinguished honor graduate. I finished my basic officer professional instruction with the Infantry Mortar Platoon Leaders course, and then Debbie, little Michael, and I reported to my initial assignment in the Republic of Panama in November 1979. As the years wore on, it became increasingly clear that sacrifices didn't matter in the Army, that your belief in the profession was expected, not appreciated. You were manipulated, and you were expected to manipulate. There is a psychology to it all, a psychology I slowly began to be aware of over the years, a psychology that would eventually be used against me. Despite the pace of Panama, Debbie and I found time to have 2 more children, our daughters Mariah and Danielle. Finally, after 4.5 arduous years, it was time to leave Panama. After a 6-month tour back at Fort Benning for the Infantry Officer Advanced Course, we were off to our next assignment, the prestigious 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. I served as a battalion training officer, a battalion adjutant, and finally as a Ranger Company commander. I'd been in command a little over a year when my company was selected by the regimental commander to go to the Kingdom of Jordan for a lengthy desert deployment. After seemingly endless training and preparation, the day arrived for our deployment. The families of our troops had been well briefed on the activities of the company, but the faces of the children saying goodbye to their fathers never changed. They were always guarded and sad. Even though this was a peaceful mission, all was not safe. Chapter 2. The Bullet. It seemed like 100 years ago. I slapped a platoon leader on the back, took my position in the order of movement, and crossed the line of departure under the cover of mortar and machine gun fire. It was the spring of 1987. We were in Jordan training Jordanian Rangers, probably to kill Israelis. I had marched for an hour or so with my company to a scorched spot on the floor of a valley called Batn el-Ghul, or the belly of the beast. The Jordanians considered it a haunted valley where the demons came out at night to murder people. It was not unusual to have one's sleep interrupted by the screams and howls of frightened Jordanian soldiers who swore in the light of day that they had seen a demon. There was something evil there, something I recognized the moment I set foot in it. The platoon leader and his men had just completed the finishing touches on the 4 enemy bunkers that made up the objective. In a few hours, a ranger platoon, reinforced with 2 squads of Jordanian Rangers, would attack it with every weapon in their arsenal. Several hours later, a young ranger platoon leader received the order to attack. He crossed the line of departure with 60 men, and I followed. Mortar shells slammed into the objective. As he drew closer, the platoon leader screamed into the radio for his support position to open fire, and 6 medium machine guns ripped the air with their fires. I moved behind the platoon leader. He gave the signal for the guns to shift their fires away, and they did. all but one. A rogue Jordanian gun shifted in the wrong direction, into the assault element. The last thing I saw was the platoon leader screaming into the radio for the guns to lift, and then the world turned black. As if it were another day, another year, another place, this darkness slowly dissolved into a white mist. I couldn't feel my body or my arms or my legs. I couldn't feel anything. I was standing at the base of a grass-covered hill. At the top of the hill stood a small gathering of people, perhaps 8 or 12. They were dressed alike, in white. I stood there unable to move, but watched as one of them turned to look down the hill at me. His face was kind, but made almost no expression as he motioned to me to join the gathering. As I approached, the circle parted, and I was ushered into it by the being who had beckoned me. "What's going on?" I said in a trembling voice. "We called you to give you instructions." "Instructions? Who the hell are you guys?" "Who we are is unimportant. What we have called you here for is this. You are to know from this point forward that what you have chosen to do in this world is wrong." "Wrong?" "Pursue peace. Teach peace, and the path to it will be made known to you. You have tasted death. Now bring life." A piercing sound filled my head, a ringing that made me clasp my hands against my ears. My eyes stung and my knees buckled. I tried to speak, to cry out, but nothing came from my mouth. All I could do was lie there with the pain, alone and frightened beyond description. When my eyes opened, they revealed the sweat-smeared face of the platoon leader's radio operator. "Jesus Christ, sir," he said, squinting at me from 4 inches away. "You have a bullet in your head." "Shit," I cried, instinctively reaching to search for the hole. "Well, not in your head, in your helmet," he replied apologetically. "It hit you in the helmet, see?" He handed my Kevlar helmet to me and, grinning sheepishly, pointed to a large tear in the camouflage cover. Sure enough, a bullet had struck an inch above my right eye, and it lay there lodged deep in the helmet. Our time in Jordan grew short. 11 days later, we were in a secret Jordanian airbase conducting airborne operations with their paratroopers. We jumped back into Savannah with all our families watching. First on my knee was Michael, followed by Mariah. I stood there anchored by my loved ones while Debbie approached me carrying Danielle. "Oh, thank God," still holding Danielle, she flung an arm around me. "I'm so glad you're home. How's your head? Captain August from the regiment called the other night to tell me about it. He said you were fine." "I'm fine, honey. We didn't want you to worry." I said nothing else, just hugged her and kissed my babies. After a weekend with my family, it was almost as though I'd never left. Life seemed pretty much back to normal. And yet, things were not the same. Most nights I would dream lucidly. Faces and images of distant friends would come to me, though I knew they were thousands of miles away. I began seeing things in my mind, imperfectly at first, but with increasing clarity. It was an odd feeling having my mind's eye open all the time. One night in June of 1987, I couldn't sleep. The visions were too fierce and rapid. I got up and went into the living room. I sat there for hours trying to rid my mind of the images darting endlessly in and out. As I rocked gently back and forth, I was startled by a presence in the room, and a hand clutched my shoulder. I snapped around, chilled and frightened. "Christ, Deb, what are you doing sneaking up on me like that?" "I didn't sneak up. I've been calling your name out loud from the doorway for 5 minutes. What's wrong, David? I've never seen you like this." I took a deep breath. "I'm scared, honey, real scared. That bullet did something to me, something very strange. I can't turn it off. I can't stop these goddamn images from coming into my head, and they're driving me out of my mind." Debbie frowned. "I want you to see Dr. Mellon about this." "I can't, honey. Don't you understand? If I do that, it's all over for us. The Army doesn't promote people who see things in their heads." I looked at her. "It'll go away eventually. Maybe if I change my ways like the angel said, maybe—" "What angel?" She pulled her hands away and folded her arms across her chest. I smiled at her pose. Look, I didn't tell you these things because I didn't know how to tell you." "I'm worried," she said. You can't go on like this. You have to get someone to help you sort this out. Will it make you feel any better if I promise to do that when I feel the time is right?" "It will," she smiled, and I felt her grip my hand. "I love you," she said. "And I love you. Let's get back to bed and try to get some sleep." I was never the same after that trip to Jordan and the bullet. I couldn't put my finger on it yet, but that bullet meant something. Chapter 3. The Selection. Regretfully, we left the Rangers in May of 1987. I received a phone call from my assignment officer in Virginia who had found a placement for me in the Washington, D.C. area. He couldn't talk about the assignment over the phone, he said, because it was classified. He quickly arranged a flight for me to the interview. I underwent numerous psychological tests, written as well as oral. Supposedly, these were intended to enable the unit psychologist to develop a psychological profile on each member of the unit. This profile, used to determine the candidate's emotional and psychological well-being, gave the commander inside information into exactly what made each member of his team tick. I guess my appearance and psychological profile fit the unit's mold. I was asked to join that day. I agreed, again as much out of curiosity as anything. As I settled in, I found the new unit intriguing for a while, but that soon wore off. For the first time, I wasn't able to tell Debbie exactly what I was doing in the Army. I was expected to lie to her about what the unit did and how it did it, as well as what I was doing there. Debbie and the children were suspicious from the beginning. This was not the Army any longer, and it was frightening for the family. From the moment I entered the unit, our life together simply started to unravel. I can't explain why. Almost everyone in my workplace was a manipulator or liar by trade. I was out of place. These kinds of units come equipped with psychologists to keep track of the mental stability of the unit's members via frequent assessments of their psychological profiles. It was during one of these updates that I confided in Dr. Ennis Barker concerning my personal experiences regarding the bullet, the visions, and the nightmares. He listened intently as I described the events that took place on the day of the shooting and everything that followed. Barker turned the page in his notebook. "If it's any consolation, I've seen this sort of thing before." "Yeah, I'm sure you have," I started to pace the room. "In your textbook on lunatics. This crap is not normal." "No, it's not normal, but I know some people who call it a gift." He paused, staring at me. "Who?" I asked. "For now, let's just say some friends of mine." He dropped his notebook onto his desk, walked to a 4-drawer safe, and began spinning the tumblers on its lock. I sat there staring at the wall while he opened the safe and rummaged through one of the drawers. He pulled out several blue folders and tossed 3 of them onto my lap. "I want you to look at these. I'll call you tomorrow or the next day, okay?" "Okay, thanks, Doc." I stayed late that night to look at the folders Barker had given me. I opened the first folder to the first page. It read, "Remote Viewing, RV Session D-2." Followed by a brief explanation of the target. I noted that no names were used in the folder. Everyone was referred to either by a number or the title of monitor. In this folder, 2 people were working on the target. The monitor began, "Viewer number 66. I want you to shift your awareness to the intersection of the target shown to you in the photograph. Tell me when you are there." The viewer responded, "I'm there. It's a large conference room. There is a huge table with about 24 chairs around it. Is anyone there?" "No, it's empty." "Okay, I want you to move forward in time about 24 hours. Tell me what you see." "I see a gathering of people now. They are getting ready for a meeting, I think." "What is the meeting about?" It's about the Americans. I think the hostages. Yeah, that's what this is. It's about the hostages." I sat there shocked by what I had read. I quickly thumbed through the 2 other folders, each of which contained similar accounts of floating above city streets, passing through roofs and walls as an apparition would. These guys were living what I had been calling a nightmare. For the government. I walked into the office the next morning and spun the tumblers on my safe. I wanted to take another look at the files. The phone on the desk rang, piercing the quiet of the office. David, it's Dr. Barker. I just wanted to know, did you get a chance to review those files? I hesitated momentarily. I did. I looked at them last night. Great. Can we talk about them? Yes, sir. When? Let's say today about 1 o'clock. See you then, Doc. At 1, I came out of a command group meeting in the boss's office. I collected the files from my safe and headed down the hall to Barker's office. I knocked at his door. Just a minute. I'll be there in just a minute, Barker shouted from inside. The door jerked open. Hey, welcome. Come on in. I was just talking to some friends about you. Barker motioned me into my usual chair as he took his place behind the desk. Friends? About me? Sure. Don't be concerned about anything. All this is confidential, okay? Barker stopped and smiled. But that's immaterial. What's important are your options. I can either try and help you here in the office with this perceived problem, or I can arrange for you to see a psychiatrist at another facility. I was indignant. And? Now Barker was serious. There is no and. However, I can and will arrange an interview with some people who might be willing to, if you qualify, to help you put this newfound ability to some use. The choice is yours. No offense, Doctor, but those are pretty limited options. If I read you right, you're saying that I can either end my career and seek clinical help for this problem, or I can try to join a group of people who define this problem as an ability and spend the rest of my life trying to harness it so it doesn't kill me someday. Is that it? That's essentially right. Are you interested? I began to shake my legs nervously, thinking. Can I take a few days, I said. More like a few weeks would be better. He stood up from the desk and walked to the same file safe as yesterday. I want you to look at some more material. He pulled a thick stack of papers from the drawer and handed them to me. What is all this stuff? It's documentation pertaining to the unit you read about yesterday. It should give you a fairly good overview of the program. Now let's break this up, shall we? I said nothing else. Lost in thought, I quietly walked back to my office, my head low. I closed my door and sat at the desk, staring at the pile of documents. Several days passed and I never opened the folders. I refused to spend time worrying about the future. Instead, I concentrated on my family. Debbie planned outings for the entire family. I never had the chance to be involved in those when I was in the Rangers, and I wanted to get to know my children. It was a tremendous escape from my nightly journeys into the unknown. It was Easter weekend, 1988. We attended church as we usually did and picked up my parents at National Airport immediately following the service. At the end of the day, I checked on the children and finally lay down beside Debbie, my hands behind my neck. I watched the fan on the ceiling spin as I lost myself in thought and quietly drifted into sleep. My eyes opened to the darkness of the room. Above me, the fan stopped cold in its tracks. I couldn't feel Debbie next to me on the bed, and I was alone. I tried to raise myself, but the pressure of a dozen unseen hands pressed me back into the bed. I tried to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. As I watched in horror the room and everything in it folded upon itself and me, and there was utter darkness and silence. It lasted only a blink, and I found myself resting on all fours in some unknown place. Everything in sight, even the sky, was a swirling mass of color and movement. A dull, hot wind touched my face and dragged across the landscape. A sound unlike anything I'd heard cut through the constant rush of the wind. I snapped my head, straining to get a bearing on its direction. I could barely make out an opening in something ahead of me. As I drew nearer, the mouth of a small cave presented itself. I entered it, leaving much of the noise behind. Ahead of me I saw a blurred figure standing in the cave. David, the figure called. I stumbled and fell at the creature's feet. I slowly raised my head to look into the face of the being, and the shock of the vision stung my heart. It was my face that the being wore. "Jesus!" I screamed. Instantly, hands were all over my body, grasping at my arms, my head, my legs. I kicked and screamed aloud, fighting off whatever had hold of me. "David, stop kicking! We're trying to help you! David! David!" The voices came from different mouths all around me. I opened my eyes to see concerned faces, my mother's, my father's, and Debbie's. Groaning, I rubbed my eyes and tried to find my voice. Oh, what happened? You're outside, Debbie said. On the back lawn. You had a nightmare or something. We heard you screaming out here, and you were thrashing around on the ground like you were fighting something. I raised myself to a sitting position, head down and arms folded in front of my knees. Geez, I grumbled, still somewhat dazed. Must have been all that Chinese food, huh? Everyone gave a guarded chuckle. I've eaten a lot of Chinese food in my life, Dad said, but I've never ended up on the lawn because of it. You need to get this checked out, son. Damn it all, I said, forcing myself to my feet. I just need to get some rest. I walked towards the house. Good night, everyone. I apologize for getting you all up. I lay down on the bed I had unconsciously left and stared at the moving fan. I didn't close my eyes again that night. The next morning I was outside Dr. Barker's door waiting for him to show up. When he did, I spent an hour relating the events of the night to him. Barker frowned. With that, he picked up the phone and called a number I couldn't make out. Hello, Bill. It's Innes. Do you remember the individual I told you about? Well, I'd like to bring him over to meet you tomorrow morning, if possible. Good. We'll be there around 8:30. He hung up and smiled broadly. Let's meet here early tomorrow, and we'll take a trip to Fort Meade. I want you to meet some people there. Barker and I drove to Fort Meade the next morning. At 8:30, we pulled into an asphalt driveway that led toward two long one-story buildings. We approached the building on the left, the longer of the two. The door opened slowly, and a round, chubby face peered at us from behind the small opening. Dr. Barker, come on in. Mr. Levy is expecting you. Great, Jenny. This is Captain Moorehouse. Dave, this is Jenny Eastman. She glanced at me and smiled politely. Nice to meet you. Come this way and I'll see if he's ready. A couple of men stood next to a coffee pot inside. They stared at me as I walked with Barker toward the office of the man we had come to see. A dark-complexioned man with a slight build emerged from the door to an office. A wide smile spread across his face at the sight of Barker. Welcome, Dr. Barker. The man snatched Barker's hand and pumped it up and down. It's been a good while since you were here to visit. Oh, well, yes, Barker motioned to me with his elbow. This is the young man we've been talking about. He looked me over and turned to haul Barker into the office. He told Jenny to introduce me around. Jenny walked me over to where the two gentlemen were still standing. One of them saw us approaching and nudged the other to get him to change topics. This is Mel Riley, Jenny said, handing my arm to him as if I were a child. And you are, Riley responded, shifting his coffee cup over so that he could shake my hand. Riley had a kind face with pale blue eyes. He was a medium-sized man, a little thin, with gray hair parted on the side. Dave Moorehouse, nice to meet you. Jenny turned me toward the other man. And this is Captain Paul Posner. Call me Paul, he said without expression. Jenny led me past the receptionist's desk and into a small cubicle where a man sat staring at a computer screen. Recognizing a new presence in the building, the man awkwardly tried to free himself from one of those back-saving computer chairs. Jenny started to chuckle as he fought his way out of the chair's grasp and nearly fell in front of us. That thing's going to kill you yet, Lynn, she laughed. Yeah, the man said, looking back at the chair that had nearly laid him out. Hi, I'm Lynn Buchanan. I looked down at his feet, and his eyes followed mine to the floor. His bare toes wiggled a friendly wave. I snorted a laugh, pointing at his feet. Oh yeah, forgot my socks this morning. Jenny folded her arms across her chest. That's like anyone else saying they forgot their shoes at home, since socks are all he wears in the building, she glared at him. He looked at me. It's more comfortable this way. I don't blame you. I may give it a try myself, I said. Jenny said, That's all of us. Let's go back up to the front and see if Mr. Levy is ready for you yet, shall we? She sat me down in a small cluster of chairs that they called the lobby. A few minutes later, Barker and Levy came out of the office. David, Barker said, Mr. Levy would like to have a word with you. Yes, David. Won't you please follow me? Levy said as he led me into his office. So, I have to say that I'm always amazed that there are still young military people who are willing to give it all up to become part of this effort. I cleared my throat and shifted my weight in the chair. I'm not certain of any of that, sir, I said nervously. And just what is it that you think we do? he asked. Well, I think you engage in some sort of out-of-body experiment or something like that. He cut me off. No, that's not what we do here. He leaned forward and stared directly into my eyes. What we do here is train individuals to transcend time and space, to view persons, places, and things remote in time and space, and to gather intelligence information on them. He paused. What I want to do now is determine if you are the caliber of individual we want. You would not leave here the same man as you arrived. Exactly what does that mean? It means just what I said. You will be changed permanently. I'd like to believe for the good. You needn't worry about that now. All I need to know is whether or not you are interested. Beyond that, the decision is very much mine. As he spoke, the hair stood up on the back of my neck and my palms began to sweat. He rambled on for several minutes, but I can't remember what he said. I only tuned in again toward the end. So we have a few tests for you. Dr. Barker will see to it that they are returned to us, and we'll let you know something as soon as the results are in. Okay? Now, before we proceed, I want to know if you are interested in the program. I stood, wishing I'd paid more attention. I hesitated for an instant and followed my instincts. Yes, sir, I'm very much interested. Levy took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. Fine. Then we'll be in touch. He motioned towards the door. Barker and I climbed into his car as the heavy metal door of the unit clicked shut behind us. We sped down the driveway and made our way back to the Beltway. I have a question, I said. Barker just stared ahead at the road. Levy alluded to a downside for all of this. What is the downside? Well, there are risks, emotional, physical, and spiritual risks, to name the most critical ones. If you trade your nightmares and visions for a little peace and understanding, you'll have to give up something in return. Well, is it deadly? Barker glanced at me. I don't know, he smiled. Don't worry. I think it will really help with everything going on inside your head. Okay, I bow to your judgment. I settled back and closed my eyes for the rest of the trip. I completed Levy's tests and turned them into Barker at the end of the week. I heard nothing from Sunstreak, and as far as I know, Barker didn't have any contact with them either. He gave me more documents to review. They concerned the Soviet Union's involvement in remote viewing and related parapsychological studies. The documents were all old classified messages, many of which predated Sunstreak's inception in the 1970s. Weeks passed, and I heard nothing from the unit. I kept having nightmares which were taking their toll on the family. I was convinced that Sunstreak was my only help. Hey, guess what? Barker came running into my office, slamming the door behind him, his eyes huge behind his glasses. They want you. He shook the message in front of him. They want you tomorrow, he said. I'm going to go tell the boss right away. Barker flung himself out of my office and darted across the hall to the command group to present our chief, Colonel Tony Messina, with a copy of the memo from the Defense Intelligence Agency. I can only speculate what happened after Messina read the message. What I do know is that he screamed at Barker for about 15 minutes before demanding that I report to him. Captain Moorehouse reporting as ordered, sir. Close the fucking door, Moorehouse, and let's talk, he snapped back at me. Do you have any idea what you're getting yourself into? Yes, sir, I responded, still standing at attention. Sit the fuck down and let me try and talk some sense into you. This unit is nothing but a bunch of fucking freaks, do you hear me? Nothing good has ever come of anybody or anything affiliated with it. His fist hit the center of his desk. Damn it! Your record has destined to wear stars written all over it. Don't you realize that you're giving all that up if you go to this assignment? Yes, sir, but I'm ready to take my chances. I wondered if Messina was right and I was wrong for listening to Barker. I mean, here a man I respected a great deal was reaffirming that I was going places in the Army, and now I was arguing with him. Messina scowled at the orders once again and threw them into his hold box. Have you told Debbie about this yet? No, sir, I've been waiting for the right moment. You'd better include her in a decision like this or else step across the hall and see the lawyer, because this unit has a reputation for breaking things up. I've watched it destroy lives and careers, Moorehouse. I can't imagine why you want to do this. Those were his last words to me. I began out processing that afternoon. I hadn't told Debbie about Sunstreak. It was just too far out on the fringe. We went for a walk that evening after supper. "Remember I told you and Mom and Dad that I was looking for some help with the nightmares?" I asked her. She only nodded, never taking her eyes off the sidewalk. "Well, I talked to the psychologist at the unit about them, and he—" "I know who you've been talking to, David. Colonel Messina called me this afternoon." "Shit," I muttered. "So," she asked, her eyes tearing, "are you going to do it?" "That depends." "On what?" "On what you think. This may be my ticket out of the nightmares. This is a chance to explore something only a handful of people have ever gotten the chance to explore. I just can't pass this up. And quite frankly, the more people argue with me about it, the more sense it makes to me that I should just do it." "Then for the first time in our marriage, you are doing something without my blessing. And God help us," she said sadly. Chapter 4. The Training. That winter of 1988, the first snow fell on the day I started at Sunstreak. Once inside, Jenny Eastman jumped up from her desk, reached for my arm, and dragged me across the room. "Your desk is right here." She pointed to a gray metal desk sitting in a corner near a dirty grill-covered window. "Oh, and there are some people I want you to meet. They weren't here when you first visited." I followed her through the opening to the right of my desk into a smoke-filled back room. A woman named Carol Bush sat puffing away at her desk. She had a black cloth spread out in front of her, and on it were a dozen or so large cards with figures on them. She didn't look up, but kept flipping and moving the cards from one stack to another. "Playing a little solitaire?" I asked. She looked at me, cigarette hanging from her lip. "Hardly." She broke her gaze and returned to the cards. "Those are tarot cards, my dear." The voice came from behind me, and I turned. "I'm Judy Kessler." She lofted her hand, palm down and pinky extended. Sitting next to Kessler was Mel Riley. Glancing at Riley, I noticed that his intense stare at the beads he was working on had turned into a frown. "Hey, Mel, how you doing?" He looked up slowly. "Good, Dave. Really good." He nodded and returned to his work. Mel, it turned out, was a student of just about everything relevant to American Indians. He knew their cultures, their religions, and their artwork and crafts. He was always an anchor in this new world I was entering. Whenever I felt on the edge, Mel was there to bandage me, to help me understand the ways of the ether. He was, and is today, a true friend. "Come on," Jenny said. "We need to get you back up front to see Mr. Levy." We walked back through the cubicles to the front of the building. After a few minutes, Levy appeared and nodded for me to follow him. With the door closed behind us, he took a seat in the chair next to me. "Let's talk about your training program, shall we? I've assigned Mel as your trainer. After that, he'll pass you on to Kathleen. Your first targets will be selected at random from the training files. Mel can fill you in on everything you need to know from here. Right now, I want you to read the historical files and get a feel for how and why this program came into existence, okay?" "Yes, sir. I've got it." He led me to a couple of standalone file safes. "Start here," he said, pointing to the top, "and work your way down to the last drawer. Got it?" "Got it." I grabbed a thick slab of the folders, carried them to the desk, and began to muddle through the musty-smelling things. Soviet programs, KGB cover-ups, names, the Central Intelligence Agency. I couldn't believe it. This program had been in existence since early 1974. It wasn't experimental any longer. Christ, they knew it worked. They'd proven that, and all the evidence was here. Several hours passed as I pored over the files, making trip after trip to the safe for new ones. For the rest of the day, I carefully read and reread the historical foundation of my new future. The next morning, I arrived at the unit bright and early. Jenny was there ahead of me and had already made a pot of coffee. Mel popped in the door, his cheeks rosy from the cold outside. "Morning. Let me introduce you to the world beyond." He walked across the parking lot and into a long single-story building. I stepped into a strangely barren lobby. There were two doors directly across the room, one on the extreme left and one in the center of the wall. Riley led me to the door on the left. "This is the monitoring room. This is where they monitor your body signs, respiration, pulse, temperature. If you ever get into trouble out there in the ether, they'll know it in here, and they'll break the session to get you back home." In the room were 3 chairs facing a large electronic panel filled with closed-circuit TV monitors, microphones, and cassette and videotaping machines. The joysticks let the monitors control the cameras in the viewing rooms. They can zoom in on you to see what you're writing during coordinate remote viewing, or just look at your eyes or anything else they want to see if you're doing ERV. "What's ERV?" I asked. "Extended remote viewing. Don't worry about that for now. The tape players pipe music of your choice in for you to cool down and record your sessions so that we won't lose anything. Come on, I'll show you the rest of the place." We entered the other door, which opened on a long, narrow hallway. There were doors on the left and right, and Mel popped one open. "This is ERV room number 1, and the other is number 2, there on the left." The room was completely gray. Carpet, walls, fixtures, desk, chair. "Why is everything gray?" I asked. "To avoid mental noise. If there's a lot of color, light, or noise in the room where the viewer is working, the chances are high that it'll interfere with the session. By eliminating all that mental noise, we can keep the chances of a pure session fairly high." He smiled and led me across the hall. "This is a CRV, or Coordinate Remote Viewing Room. That door over there is to room number 2. The CRV room was longer than the ERV room. A row of track lights was centered over the table, and a control panel sat next to the place the viewer worked from. "This is the CRV chair," he said. "That podium is called the target podium." "What's it for?" "The location of your target, training or otherwise, will be sealed in a manila envelope and placed on this podium by the monitor." He slapped me on the shoulder. "Come on, we have a lot of ground to cover today." In lecture, Mel laid out the historical evidence of time travel and out-of-body travel, from ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics to scripture. Weeks passed, and the long hours of lecture rolled on. My work had passed the test, and I was only a few more short weeks at most from graduating into Stage 1 training. In the latrine one day, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at the stranger's face in the mirror. Debbie was right. I was changing quickly, and perhaps not for the better. I made my way to the room where Mel was waiting. "I have some good news," he said. "Levy likes your progress in lecture. He wants to bump you up to Stage 1 training. How's that sound?" I can't believe it. It's terrific. Who's going to be my trainer?" "Kathleen." I could hardly contain myself through the weekend. It was difficult to stay emotionally in touch with Debbie. I wished I'd been able to share the excitement I felt, but she wasn't ready to hear it yet. I went to work early on Monday. When Mel arrived, he came to my desk. We walked over to the other building, and Mel put the electrodes on my head. He took me to the CRV room and wired me into the monitor board. Kathleen arrived 10 minutes before the start of the session. "I'm going to let you cool down for about 10 minutes before I come back in," she said. "I'll be in the monitor's room with Mel. If you need me, just ring the call button. I'll be back in a few minutes." I listened to one of the focus tapes I'd been given to help me relax. The tape carried both audible and subliminal messages. Certain tonal frequencies on it were specifically designed to help merge the brain waves of the left and right hemispheres of the brain. This helped the viewer to achieve an altered state. Kathleen came in precisely 10 minutes after she had left and placed a stack of white paper near me. She pulled one sheet off and carefully centered it directly in front of me. As Mel had explained, I would be given a set of coordinates, random numbers assigned to the target. When I received the numbers, I would write them down as they were given, and after I had written down the numbers, my hand would produce what we called an ideogram. An ideogram was nothing more than an autonomic response to the target in the matrix. In other words, the ideogram came from the unconscious mind and was somehow descriptive of the target. How this worked was all part of Riley's lengthy and cumbersome lectures. "Whenever you're ready," Kathleen said. Within seconds, I felt as if I had no arms or legs. It was a centered and peaceful feeling. My head dropped forward and my hand slowly lowered the tip of the pen to the paper. As soon as it touched, Kathleen announced my first set of coordinates. I repeated them to her as I wrote them. As I reached the last digit, my hand quickly skipped several inches across the paper. I looked up, half dazed. An ideogram. Kathleen didn't smile. She simply asked, "Is the target man-made or natural?" I tried to focus on her question. From somewhere deep inside my mind, pictures began to push through the darkness. Briefly, I felt as though I were falling in a bright tunnel. Then the sensation ended abruptly. Faint images of a white, sparkling substance, brown, jagged objects, and a greenish, circular star. No, snowflake-like things. The images passed by me as though I were flying and looking down from maybe inches above the surface of something. I felt cold on my face and warmth on my back. It's natural. I was just verbalizing my perceptions of the images passing before me. Definitely natural. Trace the ideogram and describe it to me, Kathleen said. My pen touched the ideogram again, retracing the motion of it. My mind assembled the pieces of the puzzle. The white, sparkling, cold substance. Snow, perhaps? The brown, jagged objects and the green snowflakes. Lichen-covered rocks? "It's a mountain," I called out, astonished at the revelation. "It's a mountain, isn't it?" Kathleen made a few notes on her paper without looking up. Then she reached behind her to the target podium and retrieved the folder containing the feedback. She tossed the envelope across the table to me. I hesitated, and then tore open the envelope. A chill ran up my spine as I stared at the photograph inside. Mount Fuji. Kathleen was grinning from ear to ear. "Okay, give me the folder back and you go and write your summary. Levy will want to see it before the day is out." Kathleen left the building and headed for the office, but I sat in the room for a long time, thinking. Finally, shaking my head, I muttered to myself, "It's got to just be luck." No such thing as luck in this business. I'd forgotten Mel was in the monitor room. "Don't forget, somebody's always listening, so keep your comments to yourself. I'll see you in the office." And he was gone, just like that. I felt as if a moment ago the world had opened its darkest secret to me. As I stood alone in the room, I stared at the ideogram and remembered the sensation I'd felt. Bill Levy was right. My life would never be the same. I hadn't completely escaped Mel's lectures. I found myself in a mix of classroom and viewing room over the next 3 weeks. It was July 1988, and I'd been in training for almost 6 months now, with about 25 CRV sessions under my belt. I'd had a few more nightmares, but nothing hideous, and I was feeling pretty sure about myself at this point. Yeah, I still had doubts about how and why this stuff worked, but one thing was certain. Work it did. Back in the viewing room, Mel set up the target folder and slid a single sheet to me. I took my position in the chair and hooked into the control panel to begin the cool-down process. This time, without prompting, I picked up the pen, ready to receive the coordinates. I called them out as I wrote them, and as I recorded the final digit, my right hand lurched, forming a quick, roughly circular ideogram. "Good. Now decode it," came Riley's comforting voice. My physical body slumped into the chair, and I separated again. I found myself spread eagle, spinning into the stars. As I righted myself, the lights of the stars blurred into horizontal streaks. I felt charged with electricity, my skin crawled and tingled, and my phantom body grew cold as ice. Suddenly, I began plummeting down the tunnel of light. I braced for impact. Instead, I felt a light puff of air sensation, followed by immediate silence. I was there. I began choking and flailing my arms about. David, get some height. Raise yourself above the target." I could hear Mel shouting, and I struggled to comply. Gasping for air, coughing, I pitched backward into the viewing chair and sucked a long, rasping breath. "David, I need you to tell me what you see. You need to get control. Shake it off, and get back to the mission." I sensed the confidence in his firm tone. I gathered myself and tried to focus on the target. "Smell the air, Dave. Smell it and tell me what you smell." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. It smells like the sea, just like the sea." Riley sounded relieved. "What you're seeing is not the target. You need to find your target." I closed my eyes and listened for anything, any perception that might lead me to the target. Somewhere off in the haze, I felt a vibration. I feel a vibration, and I think I can find the source. Good. Move there now. The vibration grew louder and more intense with each passing second. It became a roar, and I opened my eyes to see a dark mountain of steel coming at me. In a few seconds I was matching its speed, flying 100 feet or so above it. It was obscured by the haze, so I moved in for a closer look. I see a large metal object. "Tell me about it," Riley said. It has an odd shape, angular on one end and rounded on the other. The rounded end is in the front, or at least that's the direction it's moving in. The object is covered in boxes, tubes, and the like. Let's see. And it's got two major features that I can see." "What are they?" Riley asked. "There is a large glass-covered box on the center of the object, toward the rounded end. I think it has some control feature. And on the square end there are 1, 2, 3 cylinders about 5 or 6 yards long. There's some sort of force coming from them, but I can't make it out." "Okay. I want you to come back now. Break contact and come home." "On my way." It took several minutes to get back. I kept crossing the threshold, passing in and out of the ether without any control over the process. After a while this symptom passed, but I was to experience it after every viewing session. Riley went into the monitor's room and talked with Kathleen, returning to the viewing room just as I was getting coherent. "Look on the table there in front of Dave," Riley said. He pointed to several small pools of liquid on the table. "What is it?" Kathleen asked. Riley looked at me. "Where do you think you landed first?" "Well, I couldn't breathe. There was a lot of pressure, and the environment around me was thick and restrictive. When you told me to move upward out of it, I did, and I could breathe and move." "You landed underwater and started choking," Riley said. "You were spitting this stuff out like a drowning man. It was unbelievable." "That's ridiculous. I wasn't really in the water." "No, you weren't really in the water. But your physical body will manifest certain reactions to what your phantom body is experiencing in the target area. It's called bilocation, and you seem to have a propensity for it." Kathleen said nothing. She gave the liquid another close look and then followed Riley into the garden room. In a few minutes I joined the two of them with my notes and sketches. Riley began, "So tell us what you saw." I laughed nervously. "Well, I tasted more than I saw at first. I understand that I was in some sort of water, but I don't have any idea where." "The Baltic Sea," Kathleen said. "Really?" "Really. Now tell us about the object." "Well, it was constructed mostly of metal. I was fascinated by the 3 cylinders at the square end of the thing. They were the source of the vibration I reported." "Can this object turn or maneuver in any way?" Riley interjected. "I didn't see it do anything but travel in a straight line, but for some reason I'm certain that it can do just about whatever it wants. It can travel over all kinds of terrain if necessary, but it's most at home where I saw it. So what is it?" I asked. "You tell me." Riley handed me the target folder. I gawked in amazement at its contents. Damn. So that's what it was. In my hand was an intelligence photograph of a Soviet Pomorik-class air-cushioned landing craft. In the photograph, the ship glided along the surface of the water on a cushion of air, powered by 3 huge encased fans mounted on the rear. Riley smiled and shook his head. "I take it back. I told everybody you were a dumbass infantryman and I was going to have to shove this stuff down your throat with a pitchfork, but I'm beginning to think you might just be catching on." Chapter 5. The Changeling. I'd been in the unit for 8 months now, and I'd graduated from coordinate remote viewing a few weeks ago. That meant I was no longer required to sit in a viewing chair, or take the coordinates sitting up, or produce an ideogram. For extended remote viewing, ERV, all I did was lie on a specially designed platform, count down, and make the separation into the ether. With ERV, I could stay in the ether a good deal longer than under coordinate remote viewing conditions. Once I'd made the switch, under Levy's tutelage, I never went back. Adjusting her light, Kathleen took up her position at the desk overlooking the platform. I looked at my tasking coordinates a final time. Coordinates 785649345 described the target and any significant events. Within minutes I was in the ether and on my way to the target. I made the long fall down the tube of light and passed through the membrane into the target area. I slowed to a stop some feet from a cold stone wall. Righting myself, I studied the rough granite and lines of mortar. Grass grew up against the wall, which stretched some 100 feet to my right. The surroundings were barren and drab, the air cold and damp. Kathleen interrupted my absorption with the place. "Where are you?" "I have no idea. It's very lonely. I feel very lonely here." "What are you looking at right now?" I turned slowly, surveying all that was around me, describing it to Kathleen as it came into view. "I see a large stone wall, maybe 100 feet long. The grass is poorly kept and the ground beneath me is wet and spongy-looking. There are large patches of muddy ground as well. I see a small but a very old stand of trees in the distance. The bark of the trees is dark and the leaves sparse. I'm moving now, the wall pressed against my phantom form, with the sound of Velcro tearing open. It was at times like this that I learned that everything indeed has a spirit. The wall had its own history, and it seemed to weep as I passed through it. After this training, I never doubted that all things are animate. To hear or feel an object speak had been unfathomable only a few short months ago. Now it was a not so uncommon event. A target's surroundings recorded the history of the place without prejudice, and stood ready to bear witness to all who had the ears to hear. "I sense something wrong here," I said. "Do you see any buildings?" Kathleen asked. I surveyed the area again, nothing but stone and emptiness, and the small buildings in the distance. "I see some buildings, maybe 100 yards away. I'm moving to them." "Good. Go inside and tell me what you see and feel there." I stood outside the closest building. They were aligned in a neat row, their corners matched perfectly, and the pitch of their roofs the same. In all I could see 4, maybe 5 of them. Tall pillars jutted from them, scratching at the grayness of the sky. I'm standing at the nearest corner. The buildings are constructed mostly of stone, but there are a few walls of red brick. There are tall brick pillars sticking up from the buildings, maybe 2 or 3 per building. David, slowly touch the building. Okay. In a few seconds I was overcome with grief. My phantom body quivered as I held fast to the building. My heart ached, and a sense of complete despair and depression enveloped me. Spikes of hatred and denial stabbed at me. I have to let go. I can't touch it any longer." "Tell me what you feel." I feel hopelessness. I feel forgotten. I don't fear anything any longer, although there is much to fear here. Kathleen, this place is filled with hatred and evil. The spirit here is gone, broken and empty. Everything here feels poisoned. Everything here is horror. I want you to go inside the building. I want you to search in the same way you've been doing. Touch and ask for answers. Go inside now." I passed through an arched stone doorway, leading into a vacant chamber. I reached out to the nearest wall and let my hand pierce it. Oh my God. The walls feel like they're evil, but they aren't. I can tell they aren't. No, wait. They don't feel evil. They have seen evil. Yeah, that's it. This room has seen unspeakable evil, and the stench will never leave. The spirit of this place is stained. It will never be cleansed. I felt too overwhelmed. I hurt from being here, and I wanted to come back now. "Okay, David, break it off and come back." It took me 20 minutes to pull myself together. Kathleen met me at the front door of the viewing building. She patted me on the back and gently shoved me out the door and into the sunlight. I looked at her, but all she would do was smile back. I made several sketches of the wall and the buildings, including the tall brick pillars and the stand of trees on the far side of the wall. I wrote my summary, which amounted to about 4 pages, and presented the package to Kathleen at her desk. She thumbed through the sketches, frowning. "Sit down," she said. "So what do you think it is?" I paused, trying to find the right words. "I think it is a very strange and evil place. I've never felt the place itself talk to me like that. I felt as if it were grabbing at me, trying to get me to stay and listen to its tale of woe." "Tale of woe? You didn't include that in your summary." Kathleen was marking on my paper like a grade school teacher. "Well, it just came to me, and I think the place has a terrible history, and the image of that history will never leave it. That's all I can think of. Do I get any feedback?" Kathleen smiled. "I guess so. You were fairly close." She pulled out the target folder and tossed it to me. I sighed, pulled open the envelope, and extracted the first of 5 black and white photographs. "Dachau," I whispered. I missed it. I had no idea I was looking at this. And look, the ovens. I didn't even see the ovens where they burned the bodies. "Oh, no? What do you call these?" Kathleen pointed at my sketches, then set them alongside the photographs. "These brick pillars look a lot like stacks for the ovens to me. And what about the emotion of the place? You damn near drained it all out. You did fine, so quit beating yourself up. Why the hell did you send me there anyway? You have to experience the extreme out there in the ether. If you can't train yourself to grasp the extreme, overwhelming evil of Dachau, how can you expect to grasp the more subtle nuances of a pilot test-flying the latest Soviet fighter?" She stood, collected the folders, and shook my hand. "You did very well, and I'm proud of you. And you should be proud of yourself. Look, let's call it a day." "Whatever you say, Professor." As I drove home, images of that place followed me. They lasted throughout the night, and I'd never forget. The next morning was uneventful except for a blowout between a couple of the remote viewers and 2 of the channelers. There are a lot of arguments among remote viewers as to the effectiveness of channeling. I was scheduled for a 10 o'clock ERV session with a training target, and Mel as my monitor. Once I was set up and ready, I started my countdown. In a few minutes, I was entering the ether and on my way to the target. "Give me your impressions as soon as possible. I don't want you wasting any time here." "I'm someplace like a cave. The air isn't moving at all, and it's completely dark. I can't see anything at all." Suddenly, the cavern I stood in was flooded with brilliant light that came from within the surrounding stone. The light vanished as quickly as it had come. "What the hell was that?" I shouted. "Tell me what you saw." "I saw light coming from the walls of the cavern. By the way, I am in a cavern. The light just confirmed that." Again and again the light pulsed and disappeared like a strobe. "I sense some form of energy here," I said, and I'm having difficulty focusing my vision on the center of the room. There's something here that I can't see, but there's something here for sure." "An object? A personality? A definitive energy source?" Mel asked. I struggled to see. "There's a low platform in the center of the room. It's carved out of stone." "What are its dimensions?" "It's about 5 feet by 3 feet and maybe 10 inches high. I can't really see." "You can't focus on it?" "Exactly. It's vibrating too fast." "Okay, try and move to a time when there is less vibration and you might be able to see," Mel said. I concentrated on the movement through time and closed my eyes to the events speeding by. Finally, the sensation of movement slowed gradually and stopped. When I opened my eyes, I beheld the most bizarre scene. In amazement, I watched as 4 men dressed in ancient-seeming clothes carried a golden box into the room. One man at each corner of the object, they reverently positioned the golden box in the center of the stone pedestal and retreated backward from the room, their heads bowed. Now a huge stone covered the room's entrance, and slowly all outside light was blocked as the men labored to seal the passage. Oddly, the golden box kept the room lighted. A sense of threat came over me. I felt I was being warned not to approach the box. "What's going on, David?" "I'm in the presence of the object, and it's very weird, as though I were standing in the presence of some very powerful deity." I tried to move toward the object. "It's a golden box with animals on top of it." "Real animals?" No, small statues, and they have wings that sweep backward and up. The box itself is very powerful, or maybe it's something that protects the box that's powerful. I don't know. Whatever it is, I can't get any closer. I feel like I'm in real danger of being hurt. I don't like this. It's an invasion, an intrusion into something very powerful and sacred." I moved around the box carefully, never taking my eyes off of it and never letting the doorway out of my sight. I sense that this is or has been used as a tool. "What sort of tool?" "I don't know exactly. It had some very lofty purpose, and it served a great number of people for a long time. Then it was placed here until it was needed again. Many people lost their lives to be able to use it. Even more died in order to get it here." "Why is it in that lonely place, do you think?" "It's been hidden until called out again. Its purpose has been served for now, but not forever. It's being protected. If you stumble upon it, you are destroyed or taken away to another place for fear you might reveal the secret. All right, break it off and come home. Those were the words I wanted to hear. I felt very uncomfortable and vulnerable in the cavern. I'm on my way. An hour later, I sat with Levy and Mel and discussed my session with them. We talked for more than an hour without them revealing anything concrete about the target, but finally Mel suggested that I be given my feedback. Levy opened it first and looked inside, smiling. Shaking his head, he tossed the artist's sketch from the envelope on the desk in front of me and walked out of the room. I turned the paper over to see a painting and description of the Ark of the Covenant. "Oh, my God," I said slowly. "Oh, my God," are the exact words I was looking for," Riley laughed. "I was sure you were going to say 'em any time, but the damn thing is just too powerful, and I had the same problem. Have you ever seen a picture before?" "Nope. I've heard of it. I mean, who hasn't?" "Did you know the Ark was part of a dimensional opening?" Mel asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean a portal that lets you move from one dimension to another. I think God dwells in a four-dimensional world. That's why he's omnipresent and omniscient. When the high priests went into the inner sanctum of the temple in the wilderness, they tied ropes to their ankles so their buddies could pull them back. These guys were traveling somewhere, and I believe it was to another dimension where they would commune with the Creator. The ropes on their ankles were their way of making sure they had a round-trip ticket. Cool, huh?" I stared at him. "You never cease to amaze me, my friend." One hot summer day, Debbie managed to convince me to have a picnic with her and the children. Burba Lake, just across the road from the unit, was ideal. We enjoyed lunch and had a game of kickball in the grassy fields surrounding the lake. While the children played only feet from us, Debbie and I lay in the sun and spoke of happier times and better places. Sometimes I wish we were still students. "We only had $250 a month to live on, but we were happy, weren't we?" Debbie asked. "Yeah, honey, we were really happy. I remember what a night out consisted of after Michael was born. Remember that?" "You mean the trips to the Snow White Drive-In for 5 for $1 hamburgers?" We both laughed, relaxing in the Maryland sunshine. I snuggled into her shoulder. "Now just hold me and tell me you love me while I catch a nap." "I do love you, husband. I always have, and I always will." She sighed a troubled woman's sigh. "You go to sleep." She stroked my hair until I fell asleep. I opened my eyes to the bright sunshine. I reached for my watch and shoes, but they were gone, and I was alone. Panicking, I jumped up and ran this way and that, trying to find Debbie and the children. I turned toward the unit, and my eyes met those of a familiar figure. It was the angel from my visions in Jordan. He stood there looking at me, saying nothing. "You again. Listen, I don't know who you are or what you're doing here, but you're not leaving until I get some answers out of you. First off, where the hell are my wife and kids?" He spoke to me in a tone so loving and gentle that my entire body filled with warmth and light. "They're still here, right where you left them. You can't see them because you are in another dimension, parallel to theirs. I assure you they are perfectly safe and unaware of your absence." I nodded briefly. "Okay, but why are you here? What's happening to me?" The angel smiled knowingly. "I am here to speak to you. What is happening to you is entirely up to you." "Why me?" "Because you were chosen. Your father knew it long ago. He will tell you the story one day in the near future when it is appropriate. He was given information in a vision much like yours." "What information?" "That will be for him to share with you in his time. I want you to know that troubled times await you. Everything you hold dear will hang by a thread, and you will feel broken down and cast out. I'll say no more, except that I've been given to you by a very special person who loves you dearly. I will always be with you, even through your darkest hours. Remember that." His image faded in the sunlight until nothing remained. I awoke softly, still in Debbie's arms. I kissed her on the cheek and held her tight for a moment longer. "I have to go to work, honey. Thanks for spending time with me." We embraced as the children gathered around us and hugged our legs. I left them and returned to my world. The summer of 1989 faded into fall. One morning before work, I found Mel tossing stones into a small creek near the unit. "You're in early today. Get in trouble at home?" I asked, tossing a small stone at his feet. "Hey, watch it. Nah, I just had some thinking to do, and this is as good a place as any to do it. Oh? What's so heavy it brings you out here? Retirement. He tossed his final stone and stood looking at the spot where it broke the water. I don't want this anymore. I want a life with Edith somewhere in Wisconsin where we can love each other and grow old together. I don't know what I'll do without you here, I said. One thing I've learned in my short time here, you have to have a friend you can trust. You're that friend, and I'll really miss you. Riley looked at me with less irony than I'd ever seen in him. Thanks. I consider you a friend, too. He threw another stone, pulled a small leather bag out of his jacket, untied the top, and reached in. I made this for you, to keep you safe. In Mel's hand was a flat, perfectly rounded stone, in a supple, tightly sewn hide case that left only the top third of it visible. The case was adorned with an intricate pattern of beads and finished with a long strap that allowed it to be hung around the owner's neck. It's your rock medicine, like mine, see? He pulled his from inside his shirt to show me briefly. You wear it next to your heart, always. I made yours to indicate that you are a member of the Bear Clan, a warrior class. That's really... I don't know what to say. Thank you, Mel. You're welcome, brother, but there's more. Turn it over. The symbols on this side represent balance in all things, sort of an Indian yin and yang. The stone is balanced, as are the colors and symbols on this side of the medicine. The red represents adversity, turmoil, and challenge, while the blue speaks of depth and promise and goodness. The central yellow symbolizes the east-to-west journey of the sun separating the two powers, and thus creating balance. He put his hand on my shoulder and smiled lovingly. I think you need some balance in your life. His gaze seemed to reach into my soul briefly. Now what do you say we get some fucking coffee? Yeah. One day, 2 weeks later, Riley said, Come on, let's get out of here early and grab a beer. I want to talk to you. We drove to a small pub off post and sat at the bar. Mel ordered up 2 dark German beers. I've been looking at some property in Wisconsin, and I want your opinion on it. He pulled out a worn newspaper article and some real estate papers and spread them out on the bar. The photos were of an old 2-story house in Russellville, Wisconsin, with lots of original woodwork and trim, all in hardwood. It sat on a lake with a quiet main street at the front. Giant oak trees wrapped the house in green shade. It's gorgeous, Mel. He took a long pull on his beer, belching as he dropped it back on the bar. Yep, it'll be a great place to live and die, and I can remote view anything I want to. What would you view if you could do anything you wanted, I asked. No doubt in my mind, I'd look into the past of the Native Americans and try to find some answers for their future. I'd have thought you'd spend more time off planet looking for extraterrestrials or something. Is that what you want to do? He asked. Hell no, I have my own troubles, and so does the rest of humanity. I think the solutions are right here, not out on the edge of the galaxy. Every place I've ever been out there, the locals have been busy with their own agendas. They're mildly curious about us, and that's it. What about you? Well, I'm not at all fascinated either, he said. I think they're kind of like bored neighbors. They drop into our backyard to see what's up, but they certainly aren't here to alter the fucking human race or anything. I mean, look at all the other races and species you've seen out there. We're nothing special, right? There are far more advanced and durable species out there. We've seen them. You and me and everyone else in the unit. I know. People want to make extraterrestrial life more than it is. We should be using remote viewing for science and medicine and education. I took a swig and picked up where I'd left off. We could use remote viewing to find a cure for AIDS or cancer or Alzheimer's. It's criminal that we continue to sequester remote viewing as a weapon of war. I don't like it one bit. Whoa there, buddy. Don't forget where you are. Some NSA geek is already playing a tape of those remarks for a counterintelligence officer. We both laughed. I know. It's how I feel anyway. Look, I've got to get home. I'm in the doghouse enough, and I don't want to show up with beer breath and have to sleep with a dog. She's not my type. We left the bar and headed our separate ways. I couldn't shake my thoughts about the potential of remote viewing, about all the lives that could be saved and all the dim futures that could be turned bright. The winter was upon us. I grew more attached to the unit every day. Conversely, I grew more distant from Debbie and the children. I was losing my ability to talk to them. If the work hadn't been all-consuming, if I'd had a job that I could leave at the office door, I would have been okay, but I didn't. I frightened my children. I frightened Debbie, and worst of all, my volatility frightened me. Debbie had always maintained that she could endure almost anything if I would remain faithful and attend church meetings, at least for the sake of setting an example to the children. But I abandoned the church, and it soon abandoned me. It was a Friday, the fall of 1990, time for the weekly staff meeting. Everyone trickled into the back room and plopped down, waiting for Levy to arrive. I always sat next to Mel. Levy finally showed up, a diet soda in hand. "Are we all here?" Which is what he always asked, though he never got an answer. "Good. I have a few administrative announcements. First, someone has been taking sodas from the fridge and neglecting to pay for them. Just get it done, and nothing else needs to be said about it. Second, David is now operational. Third, hold on there, I said. Did you say I'm operational?" Mel didn't plan on missing the chance to harpoon me. "That's what the man said. Didn't you take notes?" "I can't believe an operational viewer wouldn't take any notes. You took notes, didn't you, Kathleen?" She held up her paper, snickering. "See, Kathleen took notes." All right, let's get back to business," Levy said. He rambled on for another hour, but I didn't care. I was an operational viewer. No more training targets. From now on, it was the real thing. I'd been running operational targets since about 2 hours after Levy's announcement, but Mel never got to monitor me on an operational mission. He'd left quietly that same day, though he stopped by now and then while he used up his leave and packed up his household goods. 6 weeks later, he was gone. In the next few weeks, Levy announced that he too was retiring, which came as a shock. It was during this time that a colonel from DIA showed up at the office. I was called into the office that afternoon. "David, this is Colonel Welch from DIA. He has something he'd like to talk to you about." Welch adjusted himself in Levy's broken-down guest chair. "You've been selected for promotion to major and for attendance at the Army's Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas." He offered me his hand. "Congratulations." I was shocked. What did this mean? "Thank you, sir, but I'm not sure I want this. Can I just get promoted and stay here?" Welch was obviously taken aback by this. "Are you dumb or just plain stupid? The Army's trying to tell you something by giving you this. There are young men and women out there who would die to be offered a resident position at CGSC, and you want to throw it away for a bunch of fucking freaks?" Levy's eyebrows went up. "Excuse me, Colonel." Welch cut him off. "You hold your water, Bill. I'm talking to this boy who, for starters, obviously doesn't know what he's gotten himself into. What's worse is he doesn't understand what's being handed to him on a silver platter. Listen up, Moorehouse. You are not going to throw this chance away, especially not for an assignment to this unit. Piss and moan all you want, but if you think you aren't going to CGSC, just try and stay here, and I'll see to it that your ass is moved. You are an infantry officer in an intelligence officer's billet. People know you're here, people you used to work for. They think you're being held against your will, and they want you back in the infantry. You get the fuck out of here. You are going where the Army needs you, which is where you belong. Now get!" "Yes, sir." I was out the door before he got off another salvo, but Levy had to endure another 10 minutes of the guy. It would take some time, maybe as long as a year, but I was going to have to leave Sunstreak. One of my most interesting operational missions took place over the 9 days immediately following the destruction of Pan Am Flight 103, which detonated over Lockerbie, Scotland. I watched an old acquaintance, a man we all called Tiny, die as I relived the event for Sunstreak. We worked the mission twice a day, each day presenting detailed sketches of the 2 explosive devices and 2 methods of detonation. Judy and Len and I sketched the primary explosive device months before the investigators announced their findings. We diagrammed the electronic device, the tape player and radio that contained the explosives. We tracked the builders of the device to the point of transfer, and even further to the place of assembly. We provided descriptions, phonetic spellings of names, and sketches of houses and meeting places for the terrorists. In the most painful of all the sessions, Lynn described being in the airliner just before detonation. In his phantom form, he was of course not seen. However, the instant the bomb detonated, he stood in the presence of dozens of quickened souls wondering what had happened to them. Lynn had the tools to return. They did not. During the war on drugs, Sunstreak was called upon to determine whether certain ships were carrying illegal narcotics. In the ether, viewers boarded ships to pinpoint the illegal cargo, piercing bulkheads to find packages of marijuana and cocaine. Eventually, some members of Sunstreak were moved to the Counter-Narcotics Joint Task Force headquarters in Florida, where they worked for nearly a year. The commander of the CNJTF sent DIA a memo saying that the remote viewers had saved the task force millions of dollars on search and seizure operations. However, this glory was short-lived as things were heating up in the Gulf region. I'd been an operational viewer for nearly a year when I left Sunstreak. On the day of the Iraqi invasion, I was on my way to Command and General Staff College, with a 1-year stop in a strategic deception unit. Levy departed several weeks after me. I'd been gone from Sunstreak for about 3 months when I began having trouble with the nightmares again. My head spun with images I'd seen in the unit. Swamped by waves of emotion, I wept openly and often. Bitter and lost in a world that neither understood nor cared what I'd been through, I turned into a hermit, never venturing out of my office building during the day. On weekends, I seldom left the house or shaved. Afraid of sleeping, I stayed awake for long periods, and every night I played the television and radio together, trying to drown out the noise and the images that swamped my mind. One night I curled up on the couch in a sleepless stupor, my hands covering my ears to keep out the noise of the darkness. I coughed and snorted my way into a disturbed sleep full of images of Lockerbie and Dachau, all the haunting horrors of the world I'd come to know so well. I awoke long enough to see the shadows of the living room come alive. Screaming and wailing, I ran, bouncing off walls and stumbling. I ran out into the brisk October air and fell into the safety of the grass and leaves. "You okay, Dave?" A voice came from above me. It was a friend, David Gould, the coach of my son's hockey team. I strained to stand, cold and stiff from a night on the lawn. I looked and felt like hell, and my son watched as his coach helped his father into the house. A tear fell from his eye as I passed him. My life was well past shitty by this point. Debbie and I were at odds, of course. I seldom saw the children, and when I walked into the parking lot at night, I never knew whether I'd end up at home or slip into the ether and drive to Easton, Maryland. I was sleeping in my car or with whoever would have me for the night. Every stitch of clothing I had was in my trunk or on the floor of the back seat. Someone once told me there was a kind of freedom that came from being so completely fucked that you knew things couldn't get any worse. I thought I had hit bottom until November 1990, when Debbie and I formally separated. My executive officer loaned me his legal separation papers so I could copy them and save the expense of an attorney. I dropped them off at the house on my way to a bar where I hoped I'd forget about what I'd just done. For some time, the random, unpredictable shifts between the ether and reality had been making me sick. Why I didn't put a gun in my mouth, I'll never know. I was just like a junkie coming down from a 2-year high. My mind and body craved the euphoria of the altered state, the uniqueness of what I was in Sunstreak. It was a Tuesday. Desert Shield had become a storm, and the 100 hours that followed were at an end. On this particular Tuesday, I was sitting in the office staring out a small sliver of glass that I had for a window. The phone rang, startling me back into reality. "David, this is Robert Crocker. Do you remember me?" "Sure, I remember you." Crocker had been assigned to Sunstreak just before I left the unit. "What can I do for you?" "Mr. Nofi would like you to come back." "Mr. Nofi what?" John Nofi had replaced Levy as the program director of Stargate and had instituted his own brand of program management. To his credit, he had increased the level of unit activity in the drug wars. However, he had also placed, in my opinion, undue emphasis on the unproven methods of channeling and tarot cards. "He wants you to come back temporarily, that is, to help work on a project in the Gulf." "Are you pulling my chain? If you are, I'm going to come over there right now and—" "Look, Moorehouse, he asked me to call you, and that's what I'm doing." There was a pause while my fuse burned. "Okay, when do you want me there?" "Is tomorrow morning all right by you? Say about 9? Come to the main building and Mr. Nofi will brief you along with all the others, okay?" "Sure. Hey, who else are you bringing in?" Mel Riley and Kathleen Miller. Should be one hell of a reunion." "You've got it." I set the receiver down and swallowed hard. I didn't know whether to scream, shout, or cry. I had a mission again, a real mission into the ether. The next morning I arrived 30 minutes early. Jenny greeted me at the door and gave me a big squeeze and a hard kiss on the cheek. She smiled. "The coffee's on." "When's Mel supposed to be here?" "I already am." Mel was behind me, smiling. His face grew serious. "How's the family?" "Not so good. I'm just hoping for the best right now, you know." The front door sprang open and in walked Robert Crocker, followed by a smiling and ever so pretty Kathleen Miller. She had a yard-wide smile across her face, and her arms were outstretched for Mel and I. We shared a few minutes of conversation before Nofi showed up. There was no emotion on his face. His pale eyes stared through his thick wire-rimmed glasses. He walked straight past us and into his office without a word. And only when he was inside did he call, "Ginny, may I see you in here, please?" She grabbed her pad and pen and headed for the office door, only to emerge 30 seconds later. "His Highness would like to convene the briefing in 5 minutes in the conference room. Would you gentlemen and lady please make ready for his entrance?" Carol and Judy were waiting at the conference table. There was no friendly reunion with them. Lynn Buchanan was there, in his stocking feet as usual. Nofi tossed his notebook onto the table, startling me, and looked around the table as if taking inventory. "I want to make one thing perfectly clear about this operation. I did not want to include those of you who are no longer active in this program, but I was instructed to do so by DIA. So now that you know how the coach feels about the playing field, let's discuss the game. These are your assignments." He walked around the table, placing a single tasking sheet in front of each of us. "As you can see, you'll be required to work solo. If anyone feels a desperate need for a monitor," he paused to glare at the returning team, "do come and see me in my office following this meeting, and I'll discuss it with you personally." I glanced at Judy and Carol, who were both smirking. Channelers don't use monitors. Nofi had obviously decided that what went for channelers would do for viewers as well. "I'll place your time and room assignments on the board in 10 minutes. Your sketches and summaries are due back to me within 1 hour of the completion of your session. As always, and as a reminder for those of you returning, you are not to discuss any of your findings with anyone but me. Is that clear?" Everyone did the drinking bird routine, nodding in acknowledgement. "Good. The meeting is adjourned. Good hunting to each of you." He picked up his files and left the room. Mel and I sat at the table looking at our assignments. "I don't want to do this solo," I remarked. "I'm going to see the bastard right now. Will you monitor me, Mel?" "You bet I will." I knocked on Nofi's half-open door, but he didn't respond. I could see him sitting at his desk making notes, so I walked into the office, planted myself in front of his desk, and stood there waiting for him to look up at me. He didn't, so I started talking. "I want Mel." Nofi raised his hand and slowly looked up at me. "If I'm ready to carry on a conversation with you, I'll so indicate by inviting you to speak." I felt my blood boil and my face heat. I slammed my fist on his desk and made him drop his pen. I leaned on his desk, stared straight into his face, and said, "I don't know you, but I do know you have a problem with me, and maybe with some of the others. Well, that's simply that, your problem. Let's get one thing very clear. You are not my boss, and I'm not in the habit of being treated like this by my peers, so don't you dare treat me like a subordinate. In fact, don't you treat any of us who came back to bail out your sorry ass like subordinates. Somebody obviously thought you weren't up to this job, or they wouldn't have had you track us down and invite us to the party. Now I'm filling you in. Mel Riley is going to monitor me." Then I walked out of the office. Grinning, Mel said, "Next time you're counseling the boss, make sure the door is closed." The board was posted 15 minutes later, and excitement filled the office. My target lay east of the area of operations, along the coast and inland. My mission was to advance to the encrypted coordinates and examine the surrounding terrain for anything of significance. I checked the board and saw that I had at least half an hour to kill before hookup and prep, so I decided to get some fresh air. Mel was sitting on the front porch. Finishing his cigarette, he said, "Something don't feel right about this." He got to his feet and motioned for me to follow him. "It's been a long time since we had one of these walks," I said. "Yeah, it has." "I miss it, don't you?" Mel snorted. "Hell no, it's a beautiful place, Russellville is. Edith and I love it there. You should drag Debbie and the kids up there and buy a house, and we'd be neighbors." We both laughed at the idea until I remembered that I didn't have a family anymore. I'm sorry, Mel said. I didn't mean to touch a nerve. I felt my throat tightening, and I fought back tears. God, Mel, I really miss her and the kids. Riley hugged me briefly, and holding me at arm's length said, Remember, we're like water. We travel to many different places in many different conditions, but eventually we journey back to ourselves. The way is full of rocks and stones that make us tumble, and there are eddies that delay us and reduce us to a trickle, but our destiny is to return. That is an eternal law. Debbie is not gone from you, nor you from her, as long as you continue to let her know that you love her. Put forth a little effort, like the water, and you'll work through everything else and be together again. You're a good friend, Mel Riley. Hey, Posner shouted from the porch. If you two are done making each other feel good, you have a mission to run in 5 minutes. Nothing much had changed in the viewing rooms. I got hooked up and lay down to prepare myself for the session. I was listening to Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata over and over. 5 times I listened before I found myself falling into a tunnel of light and passing into another world. I landed crouching and lingered for a moment, gaining my equilibrium. When I rose to my feet, I saw a black world of mist and a hollow sun above me. Something's wrong. I'm not at the target, Mel, I cried. Calm down, Moorehouse. Get a grip and tell me what you see. I'm off planet, and wait, I hear something. And then I saw it. A Bradley fighting vehicle roared past me out of the black haze. It was quickly followed by another, and yet another, and then 3 more. Sorry, false alarm. I'm where I'm supposed to be. Give me a description of your surroundings, Dave. Well, I can't see much from here. There's black smoke everywhere. What's it made of? Riley asked. It tastes and smells like petroleum, and it's sticky. It's got to be oil. I'm going to look around. I started moving in large circles, surveying the ground beneath me and straining to see even 50 feet through the smoke. Periodically, I came upon wrecked vehicles, more often civilian than military ones. I heard something roaring in the distance, Mel. I'm moving toward it, but the temperature is increasing rapidly. I know. I can see your temp rising here. Keep your distance and give me your perceptions. I traveled along the surface where I could see more clearly. The roaring got louder and louder, and the heat became unbearable. I moved until I found a spot where the heat was less intense, and I could get close enough to glimpse the source. It's an oil well. It's burning like crazy. Flames must be shooting 50 feet or more into the air. I've got a hole in the smoke here, so I'm going straight up for a look. My phantom body rose to a height of 30 meters or so above the well fire. I turned slowly in the air, surveying my surroundings. Everywhere, as far as I could see, blazing torches sprang out of the ground, belching flame and smoke. This is bad, Mel. Every oil well for as far as I can see is on fire. As I turned away from the oil well, I spotted a small silver object in the sand. Mel, I think I see something unusual. It's a small canister, looks like stainless steel. It's stuck in the sand downwind from the fire. I gazed at the object, which leaned like the Tower of Pisa. About 20 or so inches high, and was about 3 or 4 inches in diameter. It was a finished metal cylinder with perhaps 4 or 6 inches of its base wedged into the sand to hold it upright. It narrowed at the neck, where a valve was placed. A plastic seal had been torn away, and a portion of it lay on the ground. There's something odd about this thing. It just doesn't belong here at all. I'm moving to another wellhead. I found similar canisters at every well I could get to in the next 20 minutes. Something about them troubled me deeply, but I couldn't tell. I'm breaking it off and coming home, Mel. I completed my summary and sketches and was on my way to turn them in to Nofi when Kathleen returned from her session. She was as white as a sheet. You all right, Kathleen? Jenny asked her as Mel ran to her. I'm fine. It was hot in the room. She slumped forward in Mel's arms. Her session papers fell from her hand and scattered on the floor. I helped Mel carry her to the couch, where we laid her down. She was moaning as Jenny dialed 911. Fortunately, the hospital was just across the street and down a block or so, and Kathleen was even coming to by the time the ambulance arrived. I noticed her papers still scattered on the floor, and I hurried to pick them up before the ambulance crew came in. After all, they were classified. It turned out that Kathleen was dehydrated. The heat of the viewing room and the intensity of the session had taken their toll. After the ambulance left, I went back to my desk. I'd set Kathleen's papers down there. Now I started putting them in order. And my heart nearly stopped. There on page 5 was a sketch of the cylinder in the sand, a sketch identical to mine. "Oh, my God," I said aloud. Riley came to a stop in front of my desk. I jumped up and looked around the cubicle doorway to see if anyone else was coming. The coast was clear, so I sat Mel down in the chair beside my desk and handed him my sketches and Kathleen's. "Look at these." I showed him my results. "So? Are you kidding me? Look at them. They're the same." "Goddamn, Dave, they're supposed to be the same. You had nearly the same mission." "No, I didn't. Look at Kathleen's tasking sheet. She was supposed to look for evidence of chemical or biological agents. I was supposed to look for anything of military significance, like a fucking unit or a weapon. What kind of fucking game are they playing here?" Riley looked at me, confused. "I don't see what you're getting at, Dave." I took a deep breath and tried to calm down a bit. "Okay, look. We all get called in to help out. Nofi doesn't want us to help, but we're shoved into his lap from across the United States. Second, we're all targeted into the same area, with just minor changes in the coordinates, something we wouldn't notice unless we sat down and compared notes, which is a violation of protocol, right? Third, each tasking is worded differently. They know we'll all stumble on the same thing, though. So we give them confirmation of the employment of biological or chemical weapons, and we never realize what we've done because the only one to put it together is some analyst at DIA." "And some closed intelligence cell at DIA, Mel said somberly. "It's obvious that the Iraqis placed the canisters next to the fires to mask the plume from the canisters. So I think they're releasing a slow-acting toxin to poison the coalition forces, and they covered it up with oil well fires. Every soldier downwind of those fires must have inhaled the bug or whatever it was. The poor fuckers are walking around with time bombs inside themselves, and the rest of the world is distracted because the environment has been changed. It's really slick, unfucking believable." My face tingled, feeling as though it were a mask and not my own. My hands were numb. "They know it. Our fucking government knows it, and they don't want anyone else to know it." "Yeah," Riley said. "Can you imagine if this got out? The fucking war is over and the treating is being worked on. If this got out, all hell would break loose." "I'm more cynical than that," I said. "I think some lawyer in the Pentagon put a bug in the secretary's ear about the ramifications of having to answer 50,000 legal or medical claims against the government. They'll just deny any knowledge of it or spend the next 70 years faking research until everyone affected is in a box or in a VA hospital. This is a goddamn conspiracy, that's what it is." Riley grabbed me by the arm and shook me. "Just wait a fucking minute. Think about what you're saying." He released me and sat down again, his head in his hands. "God damn it, Dave, this is not good. We don't have anyone who'll listen to us on this." "We'll take it to the media." "Uh-huh. And who do you think will give you time to explain that you're a trained military psychic who is part of this top-secret program at Fort Meade, and no, you don't really work there anymore. They just called you in to visit for this special project." I stared out the window, shaking my head in disbelief. "I'm going to tell Nofi that I know. I'll leave you out of it, but I want the bastard to know that I know what the fuckers are up to." I grabbed the papers from the desk and started out, but Mel blocked my way. "Move, Mel, I'm going to do this. Over my dead body. If you go in there and let him know that you're on to him, you may walk out of here tonight, but are you going to make it home? Just think about it, asshole. If they went to these lengths to keep this quiet, do you think they'll let a burnout like you spoil their secret for them? Oh, how are those nightmares anyway, Dave?" "Fuck you, Mel. No, fuck you. You want some more? Where's your wife and children? How come they don't live with you anymore? Is it because you walk in your sleep and swing at phantoms? Didn't you tell your wife and kids you could travel in time and see things remote in time and space? Didn't you do that, Major Moorehouse? Isn't it true that you are simply delusional, perhaps psychotic? You want to take on the big intelligence machine? You want to stand up like some fucking hero and tell the world that you saw the sons and daughters of the world poisoned by a madman? Then you want to add that the U.S. government orchestrated a cover-up? Oh yes, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen of the court-martial jury, we have a prime lunatic on our hands. We strongly recommend that you find him guilty of treason and lock his fucking ass in Leavenworth until he dies. No, better yet, let's give him some good mind-altering drugs and keep him in a hospital somewhere so his mom and dad can watch their son eat baby food through a straw." Riley was shaking his head with anger and frustration. "You can't do this now." He dropped to the chair, exhausted. "You can't. It will serve no purpose, and you will die in the process. I promise you. Please tell me, David, that you will let it go for now. Everything has its season. This will too. But not now. Promise me." I bit my lip in frustration. Yet I knew he was right. Everything he said was true, and speaking up would solve nothing. "I promise." I wiped a tear from my eye. "I promise." I saw what happened, and now the babies of the heroes are dying. Chapter 6. The Decision. I rented a room off Chesapeake Street in Annapolis. I'd been keeping a journal for almost 3 years by now, and it was filled with information I'd received from or about the ether. I spent most nights roaming the halls of the old house, sketching and recording the visions. The mental noise was becoming unbearable. I couldn't sleep or even stay in a quiet place. Images and emotions from my surroundings would collect in my head. All I could do to control them was sketch them and make notes. Every 2 or 3 days I'd collapse from fatigue and sleep. It was Sunday, April 7th, 1991. I was sketching and taking in the sun by the Chesapeake Bay. I set my notebook aside to watch the white sails on the horizon and let my mind drift to another place and time. "David," the familiar voice of the angel called softly. "David." I turned to see him standing in the sun to my left. "I've come with a warning again." "A warning? Why?" "Please don't. You want me to give something up, but I can't give up anymore. I haven't got it to give." "And so love is fleeting, dying, withdrawing from you," he smiled. The beauty of this entity I'd found was his ability to look straight to the heart of my apprehensions. He gazed intently at me. "This phase will test you beyond your limits. You will have to fight for your life before it is over." "I'm tired of fighting. I've been fighting for my life, and I'm tired." "A man is not what he says, but what he fights for. You will be fighting for much more than yourself. You will be fighting for your children and your children's children, for generations to come. You are but one link in a millennia-long chain of warriors, but you are called, and much depends on you. Your fight rests on the gift you bear within yourself. The gift is the power, not you, the gift. The test of your strength will be in your ability to bring the gift to others. Remember, the gift is the power. Give the power to others when the time is right. You will know when it is right." Without further protest, I opened my eyes to see storm clouds gathering over the bay, as if to match the angel's prediction. I wept at the thought of what was to come. 4 days later, I rented a single-engine Cessna 172 and headed for the small airport just outside Stevens Point, Wisconsin. I needed to see Mel and tell him what I was experiencing. Mel greeted me at the airport, and together we drove to his beautiful house where Edith stood in the driveway, brimming with smiles. We spent the rest of the day and a good chunk of the night catching up, laughing and drinking to new adventures and old memories. The next morning, Mel and I woke early and hit the lake to fish and to talk about our futures. "I have to talk to somebody about what I'm feeling, Mel," I said. "So out with it." "I'm not seeing things clearly anymore. My family life is a mess. It's getting worse, and on top of everything else, the angel came to me again and told me that I'm in for a real bad ride. I think he wants me to tell the world about the gift." Mel shook his head, never taking his eyes off the water. "I was afraid it would come to this." "Come to what?" This division. That angel of yours isn't wrong, you know. I was afraid that someday one or all of us would come to that conclusion. It was only a matter of time before someone decided to talk about remote viewing outside DIA. I was dumbfounded and numb. "You agree, then, that we need to bring this out?" "Like I said, I've always believed it." We didn't talk about our decision anymore that morning. Going public with the gift was frightening to us, so Mel wisely changed the subject to fishing and local Indian lore. Later, after dinner, he pulled me aside. "There's something eating away at you, and you persist in holding on to it. Why don't you just let it go?" "Because I can't. I used to believe in the government and the military as sacred institutions that I could believe in above and beyond all else. But everywhere I've turned, they've let me down. The remote viewing unit is disintegrating. I'm afraid that the work being done there now will tarnish everything that we've accomplished. Over 170 million people will have perished in wars in this century alone, and the government I'm serving right now is sponsoring the continuation of that philosophy. They have a technology capable of altering human history, and they've selfishly hidden it away. They're planning on using it to hurt, not help. So here I am, living a nightmare. I see what I shouldn't have to see, and I've got something out there in the ether telling me that I can make a difference, and folks back here telling me I can't, that I have a screw loose. Mel nodded. Mel, we both know that the future of remote viewing rests with the good it can do for everyone. We've been charged with the responsibility to use this gift to further, say, science, or health, or medicine, technology in general. Why can't we save lives by telling doctors what's happening at the cellular level with cancer patients, or people with muscular dystrophy? We could take a room full of viewers and put them on a medical target and find the answer. We should be doing that. Mel sighed. Mankind is not lost, nor is it doing the wrong thing. Follow your heart and let everyone else follow his. Working for the National Institutes of Health, trying to find a cure for AIDS, that's for you and those who choose to follow you. It's a valiant cause, but so are other viewers' causes. Don't condemn your nation or the world or individuals. That's what the evil inside yourself wants, and that's why you see your face in it. It wants you to be angry, to judge, and to cast doubt. Let it go. Trust in goodness and purity. You can see evil as well as good much more clearly than those without the gift. It's a tool. Use it, okay? The next morning I lifted the nose of my Cessna and climbed into the Wisconsin sky on a southeasterly heading, bound for home. I felt as though a millstone had been lifted from around my neck, and I had to do what I had been set apart to do. I would have to follow my path, alone. In August 1991, I drove to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and signed into my next assignment, the U.S. Army's Command and General Staff College. It was another year of personal transformation. I'd had a faint hope that maybe all I'd gone through was just a dream, and that I was now going to wake up and go on with my life, grow back into the Army. But it wasn't, of course. I had changed too much. After I completed Staff College, I reported to the headquarters of the 2nd Battalion of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Airborne Division. 7 months into my assignment, the battalion jumped into Sicily Drop Zone, a favorite of the 82nds, for a training exercise. On the 6th day, we bivouacked along a defensive line extending several kilometers along a small creek. At 0200 hours, I headed to my vehicle for some sleep. The trail leading to the vehicle was narrow and black as pitch on the moonless night, and it was there that the ether began overtaking my everyday life. Pushing a large branch out of the way, I closed my eyes to protect them. I opened them to sunlight and to a beautiful tropical garden filled with waterfalls and enormous pools. Welcome. My colleagues and I have been waiting for you. A few yards away from me sat a man impeccably dressed in a dark suit, white shirt and tie. He sat at a glass table in an enormous white chair with a flared back that extended well above his head. Accompanying him at the table were 6 identical men. Where am I? You are where you belong. The first man swept his arm in a welcoming gesture. This is your home if you are worthy. He pointed towards the seat directly opposite him. Please sit with us. I sat cautiously. Who are you? The man gave a thin smile. We have been directed to care for you. By whom, the angel? Yes, of course, the angel. He asked that we watch over you and counsel you on the use of your gift. Why did the angel send you now? Merely to inform you. He wanted you to know who I am, to feel comfortable with me. His eyes bored into mine. You are comfortable with me, aren't you? No, I'm not at all comfortable. A lot of what has happened to me doesn't make much sense, but this makes even less. I don't know who you are or what you are, but I'm not afraid of you, so leave me alone. The man continued smiling, his eyes still boring into mine. Something stank, something I knew but couldn't recognize. His smile turned to cruel and wicked laughter. I backed away, stumbling, and looked up to see my face on the man who was the haunting, evil being of my nightmares. The garden morphed, and the stench grew thicker and thicker, the water running a sluggish dark red like the sky. Concentrating, I raised myself above the beings and crossed the water, desperately trying to escape this baneful place. As my spectral body crested the falls, I saw the most terrible sight. There on the banks of the narrow river stood a great assembly of people, and there on the banks of the river, faceless beings systematically slit their throats, snatched them up and held them aloft by the ankles. It was their blood that turned the river, the falls, and the pools dark red. The drained bodies were piled in great heaps, and now I recognized the stench. It was blood, the blood of a people, the blood of a world. "Oh my God, why am I seeing this?" I cried aloud. "Halt! Who goes there?" demanded a voice out of the darkness. It's Major Moorehouse. Advance and be recognized." I walked towards the voice, stopping when a red flashlight beam struck my face. "Sir, what the hell was going on out there?" "Sorry, I got a branch in my eye. Do you happen to know where my vehicle is parked? I seem to be a little disoriented." "Yes, sir, it's right over there," he pointed with the flashlight beam. I stumbled away, found my vehicle, and lay on the ground next to it, staring into the night sky until sleep came to me. The time the angel had spoken of must be growing near. The battle inside me raged on. On October 1st, 1992, I mustered the courage to call Debbie and the children. They needed to know what I was planning to do. "Hello, Deb." "Well, it's been a long time," she said. "Too long," I responded. "How are you feeling these days?" she asked. "I'm doing better, I think. Maybe someday you'll share it with me." "I'm going to go public with the remote viewing story." There was silence on the phone. "Do you realize what you're saying?" Deb's voice quivered. "I want you to help me. I need someone to stand beside me." I waited, but she said nothing. "Okay, I understand." Hours later, the phone rang. "David, it's Debbie. I love you. Why don't you come home for Christmas?" My father and mother came to be with us that year. For the first time in a long while, we were all together. One evening after dinner, Dad and I walked to a small park a few blocks from the house and sat on a cold bench, with only the oak trees as company. "So things are working out for you and Debbie again, are they?" I crossed my fingers. "If she were as mixed up as I am, we'd be divorced already." "Well, Debbie and the children are the most spiritual things you have or ever will have. Believe me, you mustn't sacrifice that kind of love for anything, and I mean anything." He looked at me intently. "Do you understand me?" "I think I do. But I also know that I have to do what I've been set apart to do. You know that I've been selected to be a part of something special, don't you, Dad?" Dad didn't look at me, but into the trees. Slowly he rose to his feet and headed deeper into the park. As we walked, he began speaking. "I want you to know before I tell you this that I don't consider myself unique in any way. I had a lot of close calls in World War II and Korea, but I had an inner feeling that something was watching over me." He composed himself and continued. "I think there was a reason some were spared in the war, and it has nothing to do with deserving to live or not. It has everything to do with the purpose of some larger plan that I can't even begin to comprehend. There are angels out there, and I know mine." "You too?" I asked. "I was in Korea," he said. "Did your angel speak to you?" I asked. "What he said confused the hell out of me," he responded. "What was it?" "He said that a part of me would one day struggle to deliver a message, and that he would leave me to protect the part of me in peril." "What do you mean?" "You're the part of me he spoke of, and you're getting ready to talk about this thing you call the gift, aren't you?" I hung my head, realizing how transparent I was to this man. "Yeah, I am, Dad. What do you think?" "It doesn't matter what I think. The angel's yours now, you know. I've given him to you, just as he said I would." He paused briefly, troubled by his thoughts. "You're going to have a difficult time with this, son. The keepers of the secret will not take it lightly." Chapter 7. The Fall. Mel and I had no indication that the government was trying to squelch our effort. In fact, though, they were gathering information to discredit our story. Both at Sunstreak and at the Defense Intelligence Agency, it was well known that someone intended to expose the unit. The only question was how to crush us. Because he was retired, Mel was not in much official danger. To take any action against him, the Army would have to approach Congress for permission to bring him back on active duty. There was no way that DIA was going to approach Congress on this issue. That left them to target me. I was on active duty, so I could be court-martialed quietly. It wasn't long before our phones were tapped. Cassette tapes of my conversations started showing up in the mail. For several weeks, little cardboard packages or envelopes with no return addresses on them arrived at my parents' house or at Debbie's. One day, Debbie called me at the office. She was crying. Someone broke into the house last night while we were home. Is everyone all right? Yes, but they ransacked your office. The police are here now taking a report. I called David Gould. David, the friend who'd found me after my night on the lawn, was a police officer. Deb, let me talk to him. Dave was calm. You had some visitors last night, he said mildly. Everybody's okay, though. It looks like they were searching for something. Real pros, too. Hardly left a scratch on the front door. They came in while everyone was sleeping, did their thing, and exited by the front door again. And the bastards left it open, too, just to let you know they were here. Debbie came back on the line. What were they looking for? Probably the documents Mel and I have about the unit. They also wanted to scare us, to make us feel unsafe and violated. It's working really well, David. I'll come up this weekend, honey, if it's okay with you. I know the children would love to see you, and so would I. I dropped off a leave form and immediately drove away from the headquarters. As I headed north on Interstate 95, just past the turnoff to Raleigh, North Carolina, my right rear tire exploded and I swerved out of control. I swerved, trying to hold the car steady while I slowed to a stop on the shoulder. While I was fumbling with the jack, a freelance tow truck pulled up behind me. "Let me give you a hand," said the driver. He moved me out of the way and began twisting the nuts off the wheel. When he'd gotten the tire off, he turned it around to inspect it in his headlights. "This ain't no blowout. This here tire's been cut to blow." "What do you mean, cut to blow?" "What I mean is, somebody cut this here tire so it would blow when you got to driving too fast." He tugged at the ragged edges of the tire. When he'd finished changing the tire, I paid him, threw the blown tire into the back of the Jeep, and crawled into the car with a flashlight. The other tires were intact. I spent the rest of the 6-hour drive trying to figure out who'd cut my tire and planning what I'd do if I ever caught them. Soon after my weekend with the family, I was called in to see my commanding officer at Fort Bragg. The chief was standing in his doorway, his lips pressed together, his demeanor like an undertaker's. "Would you come in here, please?" I walked into his office to find an Army prosecutor standing nearby. "Major Moorehouse, I have brought you here to inform you that certain serious allegations have been made against you. Adultery, communicating a threat, larceny of government property, and multiple counts of conduct unbecoming an officer. You are to report to Criminal Investigation Division tomorrow morning at 0800 hours for questioning. Do you have any questions now?" "Yes, sir." "Who is making these allegations?" "I'm afraid that's none of your business right now," snapped the prosecutor, brittle-faced. As soon as I was dismissed, I found myself a representative, an Army defense lawyer. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, looking at his notes. "Are you aware of what's happening, Major Moorehouse?" I shook my head. "Well, you were told what the allegations are. It appears that someone," he named a civilian woman I knew from around the base, "has sworn a complaint against you. Do you know her?" "Yes." "Well, her complaint is that you verbally threatened her with physical violence. She also claims that you were sexually involved with her for 3 months. I knew her. In fact, you could say we had a relationship of sorts." I shook my head disbelievingly. I told her everything about what was going on with me, everything. Debbie, the kids, the nightmares. I thought I knew her. I thought I could trust her. "Okay, well, what about the larceny charge? The prosecutor has alleged that you stole an Army computer and gave it to this woman." "I gave her a computer for her work. It was an old Commodore. My wife and I decided that we didn't need it anymore, and we agreed to help her out. She's even talked with Debbie on the phone. There was nothing between us ever. He glanced at his notes again. Well, the computer cited in the charges is a Zenith laptop, and it has a military serial number. That laptop is hand-receipted to me. I own it. I have the documentation. Her brother is a computer repairman. She agreed to take the Zenith to him for repair and then return it to me with his bill. Who's behind all this? This is ridiculous. I'm trying to figure that out, the young captain said. In the weeks that followed, the government prepared a 4-page list of charges against me. Every step of the way, protocols for the proper handling of an officer of my rank were violated. And every violation was a twist of the knife in my back by the people I'd once trusted. I didn't know what to do. My lawyer's opinion was that either this would all go away, or we would win it in court. In my next meeting with him, though, the Army's position became clear. I am required to inform you, he told me, that the government is offering you a chance to resign. This is what happens. You tender your resignation for the good of the service, and all the charges pending against you are dropped. The lawyer paused to look at me very seriously. I'm concerned about what type of discharge you'll receive. Well, what's your guess? I think you will be recommended for an other than honorable discharge. So what do I lose with that? Well, you'll lose your VA home loan. You'll lose the right to draw unemployment. You'll lose the right to a military internment. You'll lose your pension, and you'll most likely never work for the government again in any capacity. On the other hand, though, they'll drop the charges, and you'll have no conviction and no trial, and you'll walk out of uniform and back into your life. I stared out his window as a formation of troops marched by. I won't resign under those conditions. I've done nothing dishonorable, and I won't walk away from this. I started out of the room. You call them and tell them that Major Moorehouse said they can come to court and prove to a jury of my peers that I'm guilty of the charges they filed against me. I went home for Christmas, setting my problems aside as much as I could and doing everything I could to make the time special for my family. The charges hurt us all, but Debbie and the children stood by me and held me together. Early one afternoon, our power went out. Almost everyone up and down the street had a small generator to power essential appliances, so Debbie and I pulled ours out into the driveway and fired it up. I let down the garage door but couldn't lock it because of the extension cord at the bottom. The children went to bed around 9 o'clock, and Debbie soon followed. I was napping on the sofa in the family room, and as I dozed off, out of the corner of my eye I saw our cat get up. He staggered a few feet across the floor and fell flat on his side. He lay motionless, struggling for breath. I stood quickly and tried to walk to him, but I fell to the floor and began retching and gagging for air. My head felt as if a wedge had been driven into it. I crawled to the back door and instinctively opened it, letting the icy air rush in. Each frigid lungful stung its way into my body. "Debbie, get up!" I screamed as loud as I could into the blackness at the top of the stairs. But there was only silence. I got to my feet and staggered upstairs, clinging to the handrail. Danielle's bedroom was the first one at the top of the stairs. I shook Danielle, but she didn't respond. I screamed, and I shook her again and again until her eyes opened to narrow slits. She began crying immediately, dazed and frightened. At last, Michael staggered out of his room, holding his head. "What's happening, Dad?" "I don't know, son. Help me get your sister downstairs and into some fresh air." Without hesitation, the 15-year-old snatched his sister from me and carried her downstairs, his legs wobbling beneath him. I rushed into the master bedroom where Debbie was sitting on the side of the bed trying to get her bearings. She stood and fell against me, then steadied herself. She held on to me as we moved quickly to Mariah's room. Michael had grabbed a flashlight and was coming back upstairs to help. And Debbie ran to Mariah and tried to wake her, slapping her wrists and face lightly, shaking her and calling her name repeatedly in the blackness of the room. Mariah's dark eyes opened briefly, then closed, squinting in the flashlight beam. Debbie and I each took an arm and dragged Mariah from the bed and to the door. "Grab some blankets, Mike," I directed. We slowly descended the stairs, none of us in full control of our limbs. Danielle had passed out again on the floor. Her body was turning blue from the cold and from lack of oxygen. "Mike," I said, "keep Danielle awake and don't let her go to sleep." Now Mariah began retching. Michael pulled another blanket from the pile and wrapped it around his tiny sister, trying to comfort her. I looked at Danielle's face in the beam of the flashlight, and she was pale as death. Her lips were blue, the tissue around her eyes was dark and sunken, and she was listless and unresponsive. Someone grabbed my shoulder and turned me away from my baby. I swung wildly, striking him in the arm. A bright light pierced the darkness and stopped me cold. "Take it easy, buddy. We're here to help." Bright light spilled in from the street and yard, casting a supernatural glow over the house. At last the gleam of helmets and sudden burst of radio traffic made sense. "It's the fire department, Dad." Michael tugged on my pant leg. "This one's pretty bad, Captain," announced the man attending to Danielle. "We need to get her to the hyperbaric chamber stat." He carried Danielle toward the door. Debbie appeared next to me. "What happened?" Debbie asked. "Carbon monoxide poisoning, ma'am," the captain answered. "At least that's what it looks like to me." The radio in his hand crackled. "Captain, the paramedics think she needs to be medevaced right away. They want to take her to Children's in D.C. "I'll ride with her," Debbie said. At the doorway, she turned to me. "Find out what happened. I'll give you a call from the hospital as soon as I can." Two young firemen approached the captain, flashlights in hand. They mumbled something to him I couldn't hear. The captain turned to me, shining his light in my face. "What the hell is your generator doing running in the garage?" "What do you mean?" "Come here and we'll show you," one of the other men said. I gathered my blanket around me and walked to the front door with the men, the captain leading the way. We stopped in front of the door, which was raised completely. The generator was sitting in the middle of the garage. One of the men looked at me and said, "The door was closed, too." "No," I said. "I know better than that. I put it right here." I pointed to the spot on the driveway where I had set the generator several hours earlier. "Look, the grounding rod is still here." I pointed to the copper rod I'd pounded into the ice when I set up the generator. "Well, somebody picked it up and moved it for you," said the captain. There, in the snow and ice, were two sets of footprints. A shiver ran down my spine. Another fireman put in, "And you know what the headlines would have read, don't you? Family of 5 dies in generator mishap." I ran my fingers through my hair. I was learning fast. Whoever was trying to shut me up had just given me their best shot, and nearly succeeded. I decided that after I'd heard from Debbie, I'd call our policeman friend David Gould and see what he thought I should do. It turned out that Debbie had a story of her own. The ambulance she and Danielle rode in had mysteriously died just past the District of Columbia border, and they waited by the side of the road for nearly an hour and a half before another one showed up. Later that afternoon, as my wife relived the event in her nightmares, I called David Gould. "What can I do?" I asked. "I have to be honest with you," David said. "Not a whole hell of a lot. If the government is behind this, who would the police go after?" "I wish there was something else I could do or say." "I know. And thank you for looking out for the family while I've been gone all these years. I really would appreciate it if you'd keep an extra close watch these days." "You can count on it." A few days later, I had to get back to Fort Bragg. I turned off the Capital Beltway and began the journey south to Richmond. But the weather reports were forecasting heavy fog along the coastal waterways. And sure enough, I hit the fog. The last worldly object I remember was the sign for Fairfax, Virginia, but I must have pulled off the highway for a brief rest to let the fog lift. As I waited, I fell into the ether. I stood alone in the darkness, in a place so black I could not see the ground. "David," a familiar voice came from somewhere around me. "Where are you?" "It is truth you seek. It is truth that evades you now. All that you believed, all that you once were, is now lost in a haze of deception. You must battle it, just as I foretold. How will you know the truth, David?" "I don't know." "You must follow your heart. It will not deceive you. It will not let you be deceived. You must learn to listen." I understand, I think. But why did you call me here to learn this? Why do I need it?" "All humanity needs it. It is a part of the gift. There are those around you who possess this knowledge. One sought you out long ago. He is your friend, and you will need him in your life." "Who is he?" "You know him well, and one day you will call on him to strengthen you with his wisdom in this world. You will be weak, and broken. You never told me why I must endure this torture, this failure. Consider it a cleansing. You are not yet what you are supposed to be. You are only walking the path. You have much to experience. But what if I don't want to do this? I want to go back to what I was. I'm tired of this. I just want to be me again, like I was before the bullet. It was all decided long before the bullet. In an instant, the voice and the world in which I stood were gone. My eyes focused on a small building in front of me. I opened my door to the brisk night air and walked to the building. The "You Are Here Now" arrow pointed to a small rest area just south of the West Virginia border. I had no idea how I'd gotten here or why I had stopped. In March 1994, the government convened what is referred to as an Article 32B hearing. This is a gathering of prosecutors and witnesses for the prosecution, and of defenders and witnesses for the defense. My lawyer did a wonderful job on cross-examination and, in my opinion, cast considerable doubt on the prosecution's case. 3 hours later, I was on the road to Washington to see Debbie. But the pressure had taken a toll, and I fell back into the ether. When I awoke, it was to Debbie's comforting voice. She held my hand, her face creased with stress. Where am I said. You're home, in the front yard. She tried to help me to my feet, but I staggered and fell to my knees. Finally, together we walked into the house. David, everyone has been looking for you for 3 days. This is Tuesday morning. You left Fort Bragg on Friday afternoon. Where have you been? I rubbed my throbbing head. I don't know. I remember leaving, and that's all. David, she said softly, this has gone on for too long. You need medical attention. Please let me get it for you. Please. You're dying, David. I looked across the room and saw my image in the mirror, and an old man looked back at me. Okay, I said. The next thing I remember is the smiling face of the orderly who was pulling a blood pressure cuff from around my arm. I felt a hand touch my shoulder, and when I turned toward it, Debbie's face came into view. You're in Walter Reed, David. You're safe now, and these people will help you. The attending physician, whom I'll call Dr. Damioli, was a petite, intense woman with diverse psychiatric experience in the government's employ. Dr. Damioli called the psychologist associated with the remote viewing unit while Debbie and I sat in the lounge, then called us back into her office. I spoke to the remote viewing psychologist on the phone. Did you know he's assigned to Fort Bragg now? I looked at Debbie furiously. He must have told them everything, what would set me off, how to get to me, how to get me to shut up. Well, Dr. Damioli continued, he confirmed the existence of Sunstreak, but then he suggested that your problem stemmed from a pending court-martial. He feels that you are probably malingering. It was clear to me that he was anxious about something, and his comment about malingering only served to settle that thought for me. If what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, then we have a unique situation on our hands. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and Dr. Damioli not only understood what had happened, she knew what was happening within me now. Despite the counsel of her colleagues, she refused to medicate me, insisting that what I saw was explainable, apart from biological problems. I was brought before the directors of Walter Reed's psychiatry department. Eventually it was decided that I would be medically retired. A few days after that, I had a relapse, falling back into the ether. The ceiling above me dissolved away in a blue and white swirl until a large, oddly shaped hole appeared. The darkness widened above me, and the phantoms of that dimension slithered out of the hole and across the ceiling to the walls. Several dropped into the bed where I lay. They slashed at me over and over until I closed my eyes from the pain. At last the room grew quiet once again. I lay there quivering, waiting for the next blow. Oh my God, I need some help in here. Somebody, I need some help. I opened my eyes to see a medical student screaming over his shoulder, his face pale, his eyes wide. Oh my God, what happened? I don't know, I said, still groggy from the nightmare. What's wrong? Your face, it's covered in blood. My entire body was covered with blood. Pages had been torn from my notebook and sketches had been made on them in my blood. 2 days later, Debbie and I sat in Dr. Damioli's office. My legs and head were bandaged, and I was now under constant observation. "I'll have to start you on medications now, David. I have no choice. And now you have no choice either." I sat there with my hands folded in my lap and my head down, completely confused. I don't know what happened. They've never touched me before. The doctor's eyebrows rose. She pulled out a plastic specimen cup, twisted the lid off, and poured a single razor blade onto her desk, then held it up for us to see. "Do you know where this came from, David?" "No." She frowned. "While it was stuck in the table next to your bed. I believe it's what cut you." The blade shimmered. "Something triggered a dissociative episode that ended or began with you carving your body," she continued. "Perhaps, and I repeat perhaps, at the suggestion of what you call the Dark Ones." "Doctor," I said, "can you please try and tie all of this together for me? It's both simple and very complex. You mustn't let yourself believe that something came out of the darkness and lacerated you. That just can't happen. However, what you see in the visions can affect you once you're drawn into a dissociative state." "You mean I can actually do something to myself because something in the vision tells me to?" "That's a little more simplistic than I'd like to make it, but it's pretty much my theory. I'm convinced that what you're experiencing is not biochemical. What I believe is that the impact of the bullet and subsequent trauma opened something you were not prepared for. I also believe that the images that come freely to you, the ones that pierce your consciousness, at will and without provocation, are messages or symbols from deep in your limbic system." "But you believe that he cut himself with the razor blade?" Debbie said. "I'm certain of it," replied Damioli. I was given Halcyon and Prozac, as well as a number of other medications, to stop what the biological psychiatrist believed were hallucinations. Their effect was devastating. I wandered about in a cloud as if my mind were wrapped in a blanket that kept out light. I had no visions, no nightmares, nothing but the haze of the drugs. In late June, Dr. Damioli called Debbie and me in to see her and dropped a bombshell. "I'm afraid I have some bad news." Her hands were trembling. "David's going to be transferred to the psychiatric ward at Womack Army Hospital in Fort Bragg, where they can proceed with the court-martial as planned. It appears that the commanding general of the 82nd won't drop the charges so that you can be medically discharged. He is forcing you to stand trial. I've been told in no uncertain terms to step aside." On a Wednesday morning, I bade farewell to the hospital staff who had become my friends. Dr. Damioli approached me just as they wheeled me to the door of the van that would transport me to Andrews Air Force Base. "You get well, my friend. You fight and get well," she said. The hollow doors to the van slammed shut with the finality of a death sentence. I tried to weep, but nothing came. The drugs held their ground. Chapter 8. The Rebirth. 1,000 times I have been visited by the memory of the night, and I know that I shall be visited 1,000 times again. The earth shall forget the pain of furrows plowed, ere I shall forget the lessons of the night. The medevac plane touched down at Pope Air Force Base. I was transported to Womack Army Hospital and processed into the psychiatric ward. Within hours I was ordered into a uniform and driven to the courtroom. It was the first of many such hearings over the next 10 weeks. Enduring the humiliation of court-martial was certainly one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do. The worst thing was coming to the realization that everything I'd done in my life up to that point meant nothing to those that were prosecuting me. In late August, with Debbie and my parents by my side, I asked to be released from the hospital. In the first week of September, Debbie signed her husband out of the Fort Bragg hospital. Debbie, as well as other family members and friends, wrote to the division commander countless times, pleading with him to reconsider his plan to proceed with the courts-martial. They asked for appointments with him, and he refused. He refused my wife, and he refused my father. He refused the father of a soldier, a father who had fought the enemies of this nation in 2 wars. God must have known that I could go no lower, that I could not drag my family deeper into the pit that was being dug for me. In the third week of November in 1994, the phone rang at our house in Bowie. "David," a voice said, "you won't remember me and I don't want you to. I just want to tell you something about what is happening to you, and then I'm going to hang up and let you make your decision. You cannot go through with the court-martial. It's a setup. They will try to charge you with wrongful disclosure of classified information. If the military judge allowed this brutal strategy, it would force a continuance on the Army prosecutors so my attorneys could prepare for the new charge. But by then my tormentors would have me where they wanted me, committed to a defense I couldn't win." The caller agreed. "You won't beat that charge, David. They know what you've done, and they'll give the prosecutors the necessary evidence to convict you, and you'll go to prison." "I see," I said. "You'd be focusing all your energy on the charges you thought you could beat easily, while they prepared a case that would send you to Leavenworth for years. You'll never see it coming until too late." So what can I do?" "They still have to let you resign. It may piss them off, but they'll have to comply. You still have some friends left, David. It hasn't all been for nothing." The phone went dead before I could say goodbye. I returned to Fort Bragg the next day. While my father waited in the hall, tears in his eyes, I stepped into my lawyer's office for the final time, and I agreed to resign my commission in the United States Army for the good of the service. Then I drove home, took off the uniform I had proudly donned 16.5 years ago, and walked out of the life I had sacrificed everything for. 30 days later, the charges against me were dropped, and after yet another barrage of supportive letters from friends and family, the Undersecretary of the Army approved my resignation and bestowed upon me an other than honorable discharge, ensuring that all our devotion to the Army was wiped away. It was as if the last 19 years of our lives had never existed. So now Debbie and I were starting over with nothing but each other. I'd lost our retirement benefits, the VA loan on our home, and the right to unemployment benefits. I'd even lost the right to be buried in a military cemetery. Once I'd been an officer, destined to wear stars. Now I was a worthless outcast, suffering from visions and nightmares unless I drugged myself with poisons. In April 1995, Debbie loaded me in a car and drove 19 hours to Russellville, Wisconsin. "How is he?" Mel asked quietly. "See for yourself," Debbie said. Mel looked at me. "How you doing, brother?" "Oh, not so good," I said. Mel recognized that only half a man stood before him, and he knew what had to be done. He prepared a very sacred ceremony to save his brother. And that night he brought me into his teepee, and we sat inside with a small fire. The fire heated the interior of the teepee until sweat poured from me. I watched as Mel pulled a pipe from a hand-sewn bag. He reverently packed the bowl. He lit the pipe and took a long draw. Holding the burning pipe, he respectfully offered smoke to the four corners of the world and to Mother Earth. He passed the pipe to me, and I repeated his offering. Around my neck he placed the rock medicine he'd given me years ago. He then painted my chin red and placed a small pouch of tobacco in my left hand. This was a symbolic offering in a ceremony of death, and in preparation for the rebirth of my spirit. His final preparatory act was to unveil the skull of George, an ancient Indian medicine man who had been with him for decades. "Go into the ether, half-man," he said in a tribal tongue. "There you must look for the holy tongue." I plunged into the tunnel of light. I fell until I pierced the veil and found myself in a strange world laced with a mixture of darkness and color. "Aho! I have been waiting for you." I stood in the presence of the elderly medicine man whom Mel affectionately called George. A red and blue blanket covered him from shoulders to thighs. A single eagle feather crested his head. "You have been led to me by a man of great wisdom and spirit, a man with eyes for this and other worlds," he said. "I am grateful, but I am also frightened," I responded. "You are here to die. Did you know that?" "I am already dead in the spirit," I said. "And now you must die completely, and be reborn in spirit to carry out the work of your world." I followed the medicine man to a gathering of elders. These beings, like everything else I saw on this journey, were symbolic representations of the unseen power that governs not only what is in our hearts, but also our world and everything in it. The interconnectedness of lives and spirits, of knowledge, of life and of death was becoming very clear. For just an instant, I was blessed to see clearly the meaning of my life and the lives of all humanity. As I stood looking into eternity, the men encircled me, each carrying his medicine. When the circle was complete, a brilliant flash of light passed before my eyes, and I fell to the being's feet. Spiritually dead, I gazed into the heavens of this world and watched as the being symbolically breathed life back into me. The circle parted, and the medicine man who had brought me took my arm and led me back to the place just before the veil. He turned to me and said, "I will tell you a story which you must always carry in your heart from this time forward." A war party came to a camp of their enemies, and they watched from a distance to learn the ways of their enemies, and once they believed that they could learn no more, they crossed the river separating them from the enemy's camp. A small girl saw them crossing and alerted the warriors of her camp, who rose in defense, killing many of the war party as they crossed the river. One warrior, however, fought so fiercely that he crossed the river and made his way into the thick brush separating the camp from the river. As the night deepened, the sounds coming from the brush, which had been war cries, became the growls and snarls of the bear. As dawn broke, the camp's warriors rushed into the brush to overwhelm the enemy warrior, but his spirit had died as he realized his calling. Reborn, he was transformed now in spirit and form into a fierce bear. The bear warrior killed many of those who surrounded him, and they fled the village. From the day of his transformation, his spirit and life increased through the power of his legend. Despite what he gave up, the mark he made because of his rebirth will never be forgotten. Saying nothing else, the medicine man brought me into the veil, and when I opened my eyes, I saw again the interior of the tepee. Mel, smiling, sat across the embers from me. "Welcome back, my brother." His eyes misted with tears. "It's over now. All the poison of the past is gone. More will come, it always does, but you'll see it differently now." "I don't know what to say, Mel. I'm humbled by you, and forever grateful for your love and friendship." He smiled. We climbed to our feet and left the tepee. Just before I entered the house, I paused to look back at the place where I had died. I smiled warmly, hoping George was there watching. Debbie and I got ready to leave the next morning. We hadn't arrived with much, but we sure as hell were leaving with plenty. We left Russellville and drove back to Bowie to begin life anew. Aside from the symbolic death of my spirit, the only ingredient I required I already had, the pure love of my family. And of course I'd almost forgotten the reason for all my troubles, to get the message out that we are more than just the body, that we are spirits loosely tethered to earth, and there are dimensions and worlds far beyond what we know here. There is more than we have ever dreamed of, but none of that matters if we cannot grasp the significance of this life. What we do here in support of others is where true happiness lies. I found that out the hard way. There are other worlds out there, other dimensions with civilizations, intelligences, everything we experience here in our world. But there are also benevolent as well as evil energies out there. I learned many things over my years in the ether. Now I learn that the cycle of birth, growth, death, and rebirth of the spirit is eternal. Epilogue. In December 1995, I got on my knees and humbly asked Debbie to marry me again. After more than 5 years of separation, she said yes, and for a second time in my life, she made me the happiest man on the planet. A few months before Debbie accepted my marriage proposal, I had the unique opportunity to begin working on one of my new careers. I participated in the Mikhail Gorbachev Foundation's first annual State of the World Forum. An eclectic group of world leaders, spiritualists, scientists, authors, and peacemakers gathered for 5 days to produce some answers that would give hope and direction to the new world order. After the conference ended, I began writing. In the fall of 1995, Lynn Buchanan set up a web page on the Internet to respond to all the untruths about remote viewing. The page was gaining in popularity, with people from all around the world accessing it routinely. But one day someone hacked into the mainframe where the web page was kept. This wasn't Lynn's computer, but that belonging to a company that posted and managed many web pages. Oddly, the hacker erased only Lynn Buchanan's files. Lynn and the company providing the service worked feverishly for 3 days to reinstall the files and get the page back online. They succeeded, and within 72 hours someone hacked into the system again, only this time they destroyed the entire system and everything on it. Until the absolute truth comes out, until the people force it to come out so that it can be used to society's benefit, the miraculous potential of remote viewing will remain obscured somewhere in the archives of the intelligence community. I have one last comment on this issue. I believe that remote viewing for intelligence purposes remains a viable and now deadly enterprise, fully funded, very hidden, and very protected. I know 3 remote viewers who are still affiliated with a government-backed remote viewing program. We'd always suspected that there was another program, more secret and even more powerful than ours. I learned of it from a very reliable source who spoke of training a very stoic and secretive group many years ago. The word out there is that remote influencing, or remote viewing for the purposes of changing a person's behavior, is the rage of the intelligence community and the wave of the future. If they could influence someone to kill from a distance of thousands of miles, and remote influencing has this potential, then they would hold an extremely valuable weapon. Remote viewing is not a dead issue. It hasn't gone away, and the rumblings are still going strong. Points of departure. This work is not a quest for faith in the unseen. It is a testimony to the reality of other worlds, and, more important, of life beyond this physical existence and dimension. Our sacrifices were made so that you could know, as surely as we do, that there is much more around us than our physical eyes can see. I can say with absolute confidence that the gift spoken of in this chronicle is a precious and wonderful tool that we have been fortunate enough to see in our lifetime. I can also say with equal conviction that like anything placed in mortal hands, the gift can be transformed into a curse that will plague mankind rather than serve, protect, and advance it. The choice is ours. The secret is out. Remote viewing exists. It works. It has been tested, proven, and used in intelligence for over 2 decades. The government of the most powerful nation on the face of the earth has admitted that it knows humans can transcend time and space to view distant persons, places, or things, and events, and that information thus gathered can be brought back. I hope you can comprehend the significance of that information. Great sacrifices were made to bring the reality and knowledge of this gift to the world. It's up to you, the people, never to let it slip back into secrecy for another 20 years. The quest for knowledge is not over, and in the ether, nothing is ever still.
Copyright Phoenix Audio.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.